I should have known the moment I saw the reservation. Howard Party of 50, private dining room, my sister's wedding reception. They booked my restaurant, the place where I've worked as a server for 3 years, where I've smiled through 1,000 demanding customers, cleared 1,000 plates, poured 1,000 glasses of wine. My parents didn't just want to celebrate Ava's perfect wedding, they wanted a show. "Grace," my mother's voice cut through the elegant dining room like a knife. "Since you're already here, why don't you make yourself useful?" She gestured at their table dripping with centerpieces and champagne flutes. "This is what you do, isn't it?" My father leaned back, arms crossed. "You're a waitress, so wait tables. This is the family's table." 50 faces turned toward me. Cousins, aunts, Uncle Jim from Dallas, all of them watching, waiting to see if I'd break. I picked up my serving tray with steady hands. Then Ethan Rowe walked in, my sister's boss, the CEO she'd been trying to impress for months. He froze mid-step when he saw me in my uniform carrying wine glasses toward my own family's table. His face went white. "Madam President," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" The room stopped breathing. My sister went pale. My mother's champagne glass slipped splashing onto white linen. And my father. For the first time in my entire life, Howard Parker had absolutely nothing to say. This is the story of how my family tried to humiliate me at my sister's wedding and accidentally exposed the one secret I'd been keeping for 5 years. A secret that would destroy everything they thought they knew about me. And trust me, by the end of this night, they'd wish they'd just let me serve the damn wine. My name is Grace Parker, and at 33 years old, I've learned that sometimes the cruelest wounds come wrapped in engraved invitations. I work as a server at Maison Bissay, one of the most exclusive French restaurants in the city, where reservations are booked 3 months in advance, and the wine list costs more than most people's monthly rent. What my family doesn't know is that I own it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped under my apartment door in a cream-colored envelope with gold foil lettering. Ava's wedding. My little sister, 25 years old and still living at home, finally marrying her college boyfriend in what my mother had already declared would be the event of the season. I held the heavy cardstock in my hands, running my thumb over the embossed script, and felt that familiar tightness in my chest that always came with anything involving my family. But it was the venue line that made me freeze. Reception to follow at Maison Bissay, 7 o'clock. They'd booked my restaurant. My restaurant, the place where I'd spent 3 years carefully building a reputation, where I wore a black uniform and carried trays and smiled graciously at customers who sometimes didn't even look at my face when I refilled their water glasses. The place where nobody knew that the quiet server who worked Thursday through Saturday nights was actually the woman who'd built the entire operation from the ground up. I sat down heavily on my couch, still holding the invitation. This wasn't a coincidence. My mother had a favorite Italian place downtown. My father preferred the country club. But somehow for Ava's wedding, they'd chosen Maison Bissay. They knew I worked there. Of course they knew. I'd mentioned it once about 2 years ago during one of our quarterly obligatory family dinners. My father had laughed that particular bark of amusement he reserved for things he found pathetic. "French restaurant, huh? Finally found your level, Gracie. At least you're employed." My mother had patted my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers. "It's honest work, dear. Nothing to be ashamed of." The unspoken words hung in the air, even if it is beneath us. That was the Parker family way. Howard and Marianne Parker, pillars of the community, with their beautiful colonial house and their matching Mercedes sedans, and their younger daughter who'd been homecoming queen and sorority president, and was now marrying a junior partner at a prestigious law firm. They valued appearances above everything. Success meant titles, corner offices, country club memberships. It meant things other people could see and envy. Manual labor in their world was something you hired other people to do. I'd never quite fit their vision. I'd dropped out of college at 18, a decision they still brought up at every possible opportunity, usually prefaced with a heavy sigh and, "If only you'd finished your degree." What they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask, was why I'd left school. They didn't know about the late-night phone calls from my grandmother about her progressive dementia, about how she'd wander into traffic if someone wasn't there to watch her. They didn't know that I'd spent 2 years caring for her, sleeping on her lumpy guest room mattress, learning to cook from her old recipe books, while she still remembered who I was. They just knew I'd dropped out. And in their eyes, I'd been failing ever since. Ava, on the other hand, was perfect. She'd graduated with honors, pledged the right sorority, dated the right boys. She'd never challenged them, never questioned their values, never embarrassed them at dinner parties. She was everything I wasn't: compliant, conventional, committed to the performance. And now she was getting married at my restaurant. The next morning, I walked into Maison Bissé through the back entrance the way I always did when I wasn't working front of house. Nora was already in the office reviewing vendor invoices. She'd been my general manager for 2 years, a sharp woman in her early 50s who'd worked in fine dining her entire career. She was one of only 3 people who knew the truth about who owned Maison Bissé. "Morning," she said, glancing up from her computer. Then she saw my face. "What's wrong?" I handed her the invitation. She read it slowly, her expression shifting from neutral to concerned. "Oh, Grace." "They don't know," I said quietly, "about me owning this place. They think I'm just a server. And they booked their daughter's wedding reception here." Nora set down the invitation like it might bite her. "That's either the world's most unfortunate coincidence or—" "It's deliberate," I finished. "It's my mother's way. She wouldn't miss the opportunity to remind me of my place." Nora was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming against the desk. Then she said carefully, "There's something else you should know. They called yesterday with a special request." My stomach dropped. "What kind of request?" She met my eyes, and I saw genuine sympathy there. "They're requesting you wear the staff uniform and serve tables that day," Nora said quietly. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. They wanted me in uniform, serving their tables, playing the role they'd already assigned me in their minds. I should have been angry. I should have refused, pulled rank, reminded Nora that I owned every table, every chair, every crystal glass in this building. Instead, I felt something unexpected settle over me, a strange, cold clarity. "I'll do it," I said. Nora's eyes widened. "Grace, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." I picked up the invitation again, studying my sister's name in that elaborate script. "But I'm going to." She leaned back in her chair, watching me with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Why? I thought about that question for a long moment. Why would I willingly walk into my own humiliation? Why would I put on that uniform and let my parents parade me in front of 50 guests as proof of my failure? Because, I said finally, I need to know if I can. If you can, what? If I can stand in front of them knowing exactly who I am and not need them to know it too. I met her eyes. My whole life, I've let their opinion of me matter. Every disappointed look, every comparison to Ava, every time my father introduced me to his colleagues and changed the subject when they asked what I did for a living, it all mattered. It all hurt. I set down the invitation. This feels like the final test. Can I be Grace Parker, the woman who built this place from nothing and still hold a serving tray without needing to prove anything to anyone? Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, "That's either the healthiest thing I've ever heard or the most self-destructive." "Maybe both," I admitted. Over the next week, word spread through the staff. Not about my ownership, which remained locked tight between Nora, our head chef Marcel, and our accountant, but about the fact that I'd be working Ava's wedding, that I'd requested the assignment myself. The reactions were mixed. Marcus, one of our veteran servers who'd trained me when I first started working front of house, pulled me aside after the Thursday dinner service. "You sure about this, Grace, working your own sister's wedding?" "I'm sure." He studied my face, trying to read something there. Marcus had worked fine dining for 20 years. He understood the subtle hierarchies, the unspoken rules, the way some customers treated servers like furniture. If anyone gives you trouble, you let me know. I don't care whose family it is. I squeezed his arm, grateful. Thank you. Elena, one of our younger servers, was less tactful. I heard your family specifically requested you. That's so weird. Are they trying to support your career or something? I managed a smile. Something like that. But it was Sophia, our sommelier, who came closest to understanding. She found me in the wine cellar 3 days before the wedding, supposedly checking inventory, but really just needing a moment alone in the cool, quiet space. They don't know, do they? She said without preamble. I looked up from my clipboard. Know what? That you're not just one of us. She gestured vaguely upward toward the restaurant above. Everyone respects you, Grace. The way you move through this place, the way you notice things, fix things before they become problems. We all know you're different. But your family, they don't see it at all, do they? I set down the clipboard. No, they don't. And you're going to let them keep not seeing it? It wasn't a question. For now, Sophia shook her head slowly. I don't understand you. If my family treated me like that, I'd want them to know. I'd want to watch their faces when they realized. Maybe, I said. But then it would be about them again. About their reaction, their shock, their regret. I'm tired of making my life about their approval. I picked up the clipboard again. This way I get to decide when and how the truth comes out. If it comes out at all. She left, shaking her head, but I saw something like admiration in her eyes. The day before the wedding, I went home and pulled out my leather briefcase from the back of my closet. Inside were documents I rarely looked at but always kept close: the LLC formation papers for Rowan Harbor Holdings, the parent company that owned Maison Bisset and 2 other restaurants in neighboring cities. The shareholder agreements. The bank statements showing steady growth over 5 years. My business card simple, black with silver lettering, Grace Parker, President and CEO. I ran my finger over the raised text. This was who I'd become in the years since I'd left my grandmother's house, since I'd taken the small inheritance she'd left me and turned it into something real. Not the failure my parents saw, not the disappointment they'd written off. Just Grace. Building something that mattered. I slipped one business card into my wallet, then packed the briefcase into my work bag. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted the reminder, close proof that I existed beyond my family's limited vision. Maybe some part of me knew I'd need it. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at Maison Bisset 2 hours early. Nora was already there overseeing the private dining room setup. She saw me in my street clothes and gestured toward the office. Uniforms pressed and ready. I had it cleaned specially. She paused. Are you sure you want to serve your own family's table? Nora asked, eyes filled with concern. I met Nora's worried gaze and nodded once. I'm sure. The uniform felt different today. I'd worn it hundreds of times, moved through this dining room with trays balanced on my palm, refilled wine glasses, cleared plates with the invisible efficiency that good service required. But as I buttoned the crisp white shirt and tied the black apron around my waist, I felt like I was putting on armor instead of a costume. By 6:30, the private dining room glowed with soft amber light from the chandeliers I'd personally selected 3 years ago. White roses and peonies cascaded from crystal vases on every table. The seating chart stood on an easel near the entrance place cards arranged in my mother's precise handwriting. I recognized the names Aunt Caroline and Uncle Richard the Hendersons from the country club, the Weatherbys who'd known my parents since college. 50 people who'd watched Ava grow up, who'd attended her graduation parties and congratulated my parents on raising such an accomplished daughter. My name wasn't on the seating chart, of course. I wasn't a guest. The wedding party arrived at 7 sharp. I heard them before I saw them, a wave of laughter and champagne-bright voices spilling through the entrance. Then Ava appeared in the doorway, and even I had to admit she looked beautiful. Her dress was classic elegant, the kind of timeless silhouette my mother would have chosen. Her dark hair was swept up her makeup perfect, her smile radiant as guests surged forward to embrace her. I stood near the bar, partially hidden behind a column, and watched my sister become the center of everyone's universe. My mother held court near the windows, resplendent in dusty rose silk, accepting compliments on the venue with gracious nods. "Yes, it is lovely, isn't it?" Ava insisted on Maison Bissé. "She has such refined taste." No mention of her other daughter who worked here. No acknowledgement of my existence at all. The toasts began after the salad course. Ava's new husband, Brandon, stood with his champagne flute, raised his face flushed with happiness and expensive wine. "To my beautiful bride," he said, and everyone cheered. His best man followed with a rambling story about college football games and late-night pizza runs. Aunt Caroline dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. Then my father stood. Howard Parker commanded attention without effort. Tall, silver-haired, with the confident posture of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. "My daughter," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room, "has always made us proud. From her first piano recital to her college graduation, to this moment watching her marry a fine young man from a good family." He paused, letting the words settle. "Marianne and I are blessed. Truly blessed." I poured water into crystal glasses at table 7. My hand steady, my face neutral. Not one person looked at me. I was part of the scenery, as invisible as the wallpaper. The first dance was everything a first dance should be. Ava and Brandon swayed to some romantic ballad, while guests formed a circle around them, phones held high to capture the moment. The DJ transitioned smoothly into upbeat classics. Uncle Richard pulled Aunt Caroline onto the floor. The Weatherbys joined them. My mother danced with Brandon's father, both of them moving with the practiced ease of people who'd attended 1,000 events like this. I circulated through the room with a wine bottle, offering refills, collecting empty glasses. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small nod. "You okay?" I nodded back. "I'm fine." That's when Ethan Rowe arrived. I noticed him immediately because he was late, slipping through the entrance just as the salad plates were being cleared. He was younger than most of the guests, maybe 40, with dark-rimmed glasses and the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd come straight from the office. I knew who he was. Ava had mentioned her boss countless times during our obligatory phone calls, always with a mixture of admiration and nervousness. Ethan Rowe, senior partner at Morrison & Hale, the corporate law firm where my sister worked as a junior associate. He found his place card at table 3 near the windows and settled in with an apologetic smile to his table mates. I watched him scan the room with the assessing gaze of someone used to reading situations quickly. His eyes moved over the flowers, the guests, the happy couple still on the dance floor. Then his gaze landed on me. I was refilling wine glasses at table 5, bent slightly forward in the practiced posture of attentive service. For just a moment, I saw confusion flicker across his features. Then he looked away, shaking his head slightly as if dismissing whatever thought had crossed his mind. I finished my rounds and returned to the service station near the kitchen doors. Through the small window, I could see Marcel overseeing the entree plating with his usual intensity. Everything was running smoothly. The guests were happy. My sister was glowing. My parents were basking in reflected glory. And I was invisible. My father caught my eye as I emerged with a fresh bottle of wine. He was standing with a group of his golf buddies near the bar, all of them red-faced and jovial from good food and better alcohol. He crooked his finger at me, summoning me over with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never considered that a server might be a person with thoughts and feelings. I approached with the bottle. "Sir?" He didn't look at me when he spoke, addressing his companions instead. "This is my older daughter, Grace. She works here." The way he said it made it sound like a punchline he was setting up. One of the men, someone I vaguely recognized from childhood barbecues, gave me a polite smile. "Oh, how nice. Are you in restaurant management?" Before I could answer, my father laughed that same bark of amusement I'd heard my entire life. "Management, no. Grace is a waitress." He finally looked at me, his eyes cold beneath the friendly expression. "Go serve, pour the wine. You still work here, don't you?" I poured the wine with hands that didn't shake. The Cabernet flowed into his glass in a perfect crimson stream, exactly the right amount, stopping just below the widest part of the bowl, the way I'd been trained. "Of course, sir," I said, my voice steady and professional. "Enjoy your evening." I moved to the next table before he could say anything else, before his golf buddies could offer their sympathetic smiles or awkward attempts to change the subject. The test, I reminded myself. This was the test. Could I stand here in this uniform knowing what I knew about myself and let his words roll off me like rain off glass? The answer, I discovered, was yes. But it cost something. The entrees were served at 8:15. Filet mignon with burgundy reduction, exactly as my mother had ordered during her tasting appointment last month. She'd come in on a Tuesday afternoon, swept through the restaurant with Ava in tow, sampling dishes and making pronouncements about flavor profiles. She'd spoken to Nora the entire time, never once acknowledging that her other daughter was standing 10 feet away polishing wine glasses at the bar. Now those same dishes were being presented to 50 guests who murmured appreciation at the presentation, at the tenderness of the meat, at the delicate balance of the sauce. I watched Marcus and Elena work the room with smooth efficiency, their movements synchronized from years of practice. I should have been in the kitchen overseeing the timing, checking Marcel's plating, ensuring everything met the standards I'd set for this place. Instead, I was refilling water glasses and removing empty bread baskets. My mother found me near the dessert station. "Grace, darling," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. The Hendersons were seated 3 feet away. Aunt Caroline and Uncle Richard were even closer. "Since you're here anyway, would you mind terribly clearing some of these plates? The staff seems a bit overwhelmed." She gestured vaguely at the tables where, in fact, no plates needed clearing yet. The entree course was barely finished. I looked at her directly for the first time that evening. Marianne Parker, 62 years old. Her face smooth from expensive creams and strategic Botox. Her smile as perfect and empty as a magazine advertisement. She wanted an audience for this moment. She'd positioned herself deliberately. "Of course, Mother," I said. "Happy to help." I began gathering plates from table 8, even though Elena was already moving toward them with her service tray. Mrs. Henderson, who'd known me since I was in elementary school, looked uncomfortable. "Oh, Grace, you don't have to." "It's no trouble at all," my mother interjected smoothly. She touched Mrs. Henderson's shoulder with practiced warmth. "Grace is so dedicated to her work. We're very proud of how seriously she takes her responsibilities." The subtext hung in the air, unspoken but clear. At least she has responsibilities now. At least she's employed. I stacked the plates carefully, my movements precise. Behind me, I heard my mother continue talking to the Hendersons, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when discussing topics she found mildly distasteful, but was too polite to criticize directly. "She's been here for 3 years now. It's been good for her, I think. Structure. Routine." A delicate pause. After everything. After everything. The phrase my parents used to describe the years I'd spent caring for my grandmother, as if it were some shameful period of unemployment rather than a deliberate choice. They'd never asked what I did during those years. Never wondered how I paid rent, bought groceries, managed to stay afloat. They'd simply written me off as another disappointment, another conversation they had to navigate carefully at dinner parties. "At least she has a job." My father's voice drifted over from the bar where he'd moved with his golf buddies. "Not unemployed like before." His companion, someone I didn't recognize, made a vaguely agreeing sound. My father continued warming to his theme. "We were worried for a while there. After she dropped out, she just seemed lost. But this, well, it's honest work." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread through nearby conversations. I saw heads turn slightly, guests pretending not to listen while absorbing every word. My sister's wedding was lovely. Yes, but family drama was always more interesting than centerpieces. I carried the plates toward the kitchen, my spine straight, my expression calm. In the reflective surface of the stainless steel doors, I caught a glimpse of myself. White shirt, black apron, hair pulled back in a neat bun. I looked exactly like what they thought I was. But my eyes were different. Cold, proud, unbroken. I pushed through the doors into the controlled chaos of the kitchen. Marcel glanced up from garnishing dessert plates, took one look at my face, and said something sharp in French to his sous chef. Then he crossed to me in 3 strides. "They are treating you badly," he said. Not a question. "They're treating me exactly how they always have. I'm just noticing it more clearly now." I set down the plates. "How's the dessert service looking?" He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 10 minutes. The chocolate torte, it is perfect." He paused. "You are too good for them, Grace. You know this, yes?" "I'm beginning to," I said. When I returned to the dining room, the energy had shifted. Guests were standing, moving between tables, the formality of the meal giving way to the relaxed socializing of after-dinner drinks. Ava was laughing with her bridesmaids near the windows. Brandon was deep in conversation with Ethan Rowe, probably talking shop about corporate law. My parents held court near the center of the room, my father's arm around my mother's waist, both of them glowing with satisfaction. I picked up a tray of empty champagne flutes from table 3. That's when Ethan Rowe turned his gaze, sweeping the room in that assessing way of his. His eyes landed on me, really looked at me this time, and I watched recognition slam into him like a physical force. His face went white. The champagne glass in his hand trembled slightly. He took 2 steps toward me, his expression somewhere between shock and confusion, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the ambient noise of conversation and clinking glasses like a knife through silk. "Madam President." Ethan looked up, froze, then asked, "Why are you here?" The room froze. It happened in layers like dominoes falling in slow motion. The couple nearest us stopped mid-sentence, their conversation dying in their throats. Then the table behind them went quiet. Then the next. The silence spread outward in concentric circles until 50 people stood suspended in a moment that felt like stepping off a cliff, that breathless instant before gravity takes hold. Even the ambient sounds disappeared. No clink of silverware against china. No rustle of napkins. No background murmur of multiple conversations blending into white noise. Just Ethan Rowe's voice hanging in the air like a bell that had been rung and couldn't be unrung. "Madam President?" I stood there with my tray of empty champagne flutes, still wearing my server's uniform, and watched the confusion ripple across faces I'd known my entire life. Aunt Caroline's mouth opened slightly. Mrs. Henderson blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. Uncle Richard looked from Ethan to me and back again, his expression utterly bewildered. But it was the staff reaction that told the real story. Marcus had been clearing table 6 when Ethan spoke. I saw him freeze with a stack of dessert plates balanced in his hands, his eyes going wide. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd worked here long enough to notice things, to pick up on the way Nora deferred to me on certain decisions, the way I moved through this restaurant with unconscious ownership. Elena stood near the kitchen doors, her serving tray tilted at a dangerous angle, staring at me with her mouth literally hanging open. She'd asked me once months ago why I cared so much about the temperature of the dining room, why I noticed when a single light bulb needed replacing. I'd deflected with a joke about perfectionism. Now I could see her mentally reviewing every interaction we'd ever had, watching the pieces click into place. Sophia emerged from the wine cellar at exactly the wrong moment, a bottle of vintage port in her hands for the after-dinner service. She took in the frozen tableau, saw Ethan staring at me with that mixture of respect and confusion, and her eyes met mine across the room. There was no surprise in her expression. Only a small, knowing nod, as if I'd finally confirmed something she'd suspected all along. But it was Nora's reaction that nearly broke my composure. She'd been stationed near the entrance, overseeing the flow of service with her usual quiet competence. When Ethan's words cut through the room, she pressed one hand to her chest, her face cycling through a series of emotions too quick to name. Fear for me, pride, concern about what would happen next. We'd kept this secret for 3 years, the two of us and Marcel and the accountant. Now it was spilling out in front of 50 witnesses at my sister's wedding reception. My father was the first to recover. Of course he was. Howard Parker had spent his entire life navigating social situations, smoothing over awkward moments, controlling narratives. He stepped forward with a laugh that sounded almost genuine, the kind of hearty chuckle meant to diffuse tension and redirect attention. "Ethan, what are you joking about?" He clapped the younger man on the shoulder with practiced bonhomie, his smile wide and dismissive. "This is my daughter Grace. She works here. She's a waitress." He emphasized the last word slightly, as if Ethan had simply made an honest mistake that could be easily corrected. But Ethan didn't laugh along. He didn't smile or nod or play along with my father's attempt to rewrite reality. Instead, he pulled out his phone with hands that weren't quite steady, scrolled through something, then looked at me again with absolute certainty. "No," he said quietly. "No, that's not right." My mother had joined my father now, her hand on his arm, her face arranged in polite confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What's going on?" She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to explain this bizarre interruption, to apologize for somehow causing a scene at Ava's perfect wedding. I set down my tray on the nearest table. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. This was it then. The moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and preparing for since the day I'd accepted my mother's deliberate humiliation. "Ethan," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the unnatural silence. "It's fine. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He was scrolling through his phone again, pulling up something, his face flushed with the awkwardness of being at the center of attention. "We've been negotiating for 3 months. I've been in meetings with you. I've sent you proposals, budgets, contracts." He looked up at my parents, then at the assembled guests, then back at me. "You're not a waitress." My sister had pushed through the crowd now, her white dress catching the light from the chandeliers. Brandon was right behind her, looking utterly lost. "What's happening?" Ava's voice was thin, uncertain. "Grace, what is he talking about?" I met her eyes, my baby sister, who'd never questioned our parents' version of our family story, who'd accepted without examination that I was the failure and she was the success. For a moment, I felt something like pity. "Ava," I said gently, "it's complicated." 3 months ago, Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength. Morrison & Hale was hired to handle a major commercial real estate acquisition. Multiple properties, complex financing, cross-state regulatory issues. Our client was Rowan Harbor Holdings, a privately held investment company. He paused, making sure everyone was following. "I've been working directly with the company's founder and CEO. We've had video conferences. We've exchanged hundreds of emails. I know exactly who she is." My father's smile was faltering now, becoming fixed and brittle. "That's impossible. Grace is brilliant," Ethan interrupted, and there was something fierce in his tone, almost protective. "She's one of the sharpest business minds I've ever worked with. She built an investment portfolio from nothing, acquired 3 restaurant properties in 5 years, and she did it all while maintaining complete anonymity." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it up so everyone could see the simple black cardstock with silver lettering. "Chairman of Rowan Harbor Holdings." Ethan held up the business card. "Correct, Madam President." I took the business card from Ethan's outstretched hand, feeling the familiar weight of the cardstock between my fingers. How many of these had I handed out over the years? Dozens. Hundreds, maybe. To lawyers and accountants and real estate brokers and bank executives. To everyone except the people standing in this room. "Yes," I said simply. "That's correct." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the frozen shock of Ethan's initial question. This was the heavy, suffocating quiet of people trying to reorganize everything they thought they knew about the world. My father's face had gone from ruddy to pale, his characteristic confidence draining away like water from a cracked glass. "I don't understand," he said, and for the first time in my life, Howard Parker sounded genuinely uncertain. You work here. You're a server. We've seen you, I do work here, I confirmed. I work the floor 3 nights a week. I've been doing it since Maison Bissé opened 5 years ago. I gestured around the elegant dining room at the custom millwork and the imported French light fixtures and the wine cellar that held over 2,000 bottles. I own it. I own all of it. Mrs. Henderson found her voice first tentative and confused. But Grace, dear, how did you... My grandmother, I said, and saying her name out loud in this room felt like opening a window in a stuffy space. When she passed away 8 years ago, she left me her house. It wasn't much a small bungalow in a neighborhood that was just starting to gentrify. I sold it for $230,000. I saw my mother's eyes widen slightly. She hadn't known about the inheritance. Neither of them had. I used that money as seed capital. Started small, invested carefully. Real estate partnerships, commercial properties, small business acquisitions. Within 3 years, I had enough to buy this building and open Maison Bissé. Ethan was nodding, his initial shock settling into something like vindication. Rowan Harbor Holdings now owns 3 restaurants across 2 states. The portfolio's worth is confidential, but I can tell you the real estate alone is valued in the high 7 figures. He looked at my parents with something close to incredulity. You really didn't know. My mother had found her voice, though it came out thinner than usual. But why would you hide it? Why wouldn't you tell us you were successful? It was such a perfectly Marianne Parker question. Success was something you displayed, something you used to gain social capital and admiration. The idea that someone might achieve something and choose not to broadcast it was genuinely incomprehensible to her. Because, I said carefully, I needed to know if I could do it on my own terms, not as Howard and Marianne Parker's daughter, not trading on a family name or reputation, just as Grace. I met Nora's eyes across the room and saw her nod slightly. When I started working the floor here, it wasn't because I had to. It was because I wanted to understand every aspect of this business. I wanted to serve tables and polish glassware and hear what customers said when they thought the owner wasn't listening. I wanted to know if my staff would respect someone based on how they worked, not what title they held. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. You were testing us, he said. Not accusatory, just understanding. I was testing myself, I corrected gently. Could I be excellent at something without needing recognition for it? Could I build something real without needing my parents' approval? I looked at my father. Turns out I could. Brandon, who'd been silent this whole time, cleared his throat awkwardly. So when Ava told me her sister worked at this restaurant, she meant exactly what she said, I confirmed. I do work here. She just didn't know I also owned it. I turned to Ethan. How much have you told Ava about the Morrison and Hale project? He shifted uncomfortably. Attorney-client privilege means I couldn't disclose the client's identity. She knew I was working on a major acquisition deal, but all our firm's communications with Rowan Harbor went through your corporate counsel and directly to you. She had no way of knowing. My sister had been standing frozen, her perfect wedding makeup starting to streak slightly as tears gathered in her eyes. 3 months, she whispered. Ethan's been working on this deal for 3 months. He kept talking about how impressed he was with the client, how sharp they were, how they'd built something remarkable from nothing. Her voice broke slightly. He was talking about you. I didn't know it was your sister, Ethan said quickly, looking between us. Not until tonight. Grace uses her middle name for business. Rowan. I'd never made the connection. The guests were starting to murmur now, the shock giving way to speculation and reassessment. I could see the mental calculations happening, people reviewing every interaction they'd had with me, every dismissive comment, every pitying smile. Aunt Caroline looked genuinely stricken. Uncle Richard kept shaking his head as if trying to clear it. My father rallied, drawing himself up with visible effort. Well, he said, his voice attempting joviality and landing somewhere near desperate. This is quite a surprise. If we'd known, we certainly would have. He trailed off, perhaps realizing there was no good end to that sentence. Would have what? I asked quietly. Treated me differently, respected my choices, stopped introducing me as your disappointing daughter. The room went silent again. I didn't tell you because I needed to prove something to myself, not to you. I needed to know that my worth wasn't dependent on your recognition. Ava took a shaky step toward me, her hands trembling. You kept this from us, she whispered. But it was Ethan who answered, his voice firm and clear in the hushed room. No, she just didn't need to brag. Ethan's words hung in the air, and I felt something crack open inside me, some carefully maintained wall that had been holding back 15 years of memories I'd tried not to examine too closely. The room was still silent, still waiting, and suddenly I was 18 again, standing in my parents' pristine living room with my backpack at my feet and my grandmother's desperate phone call still echoing in my ears. I need to take a semester off, I'd told them. It was October of my freshman year. I'd been at State for exactly 6 weeks. Grandma Eleanor called. She's getting worse. She wandered into traffic yesterday. The neighbors found her 3 blocks from home in her nightgown. She needs someone with her. My father hadn't even looked up from his newspaper. Eleanor has plenty of money. She can hire a nurse. She doesn't want a stranger. She wants family. I'd been so young then, so certain that explaining would make them understand. I can take classes online or maybe audit some courses at the community college near her house. I'll go back to State next fall when she's more stable. My mother had set down her coffee cup with that precise, controlled movement that meant she was annoyed. Grace, this is exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making we've worried about. You can't just throw away your education because your grandmother is having a difficult time adjusting to aging. She has dementia. I'd said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. It's not adjustment. It's a disease. She's forgetting how to get home. She's forgetting to eat. Someone needs to be there. Then we'll find someone, my father had said, finally lowering his newspaper. A professional. Someone qualified. You are not dropping out of college to play nursemaid. But I had. I'd withdrawn from my classes, packed up my dorm room, and moved into my grandmother's small bungalow with its creaky floors and outdated kitchen and the garden she'd tended for 40 years. I'd learned to hide the car keys to lock the doors at night to gently redirect her when she forgot where she was or who I was or why this strange young woman kept insisting she take her medication. My parents had been furious. Not worried. Not sympathetic. Furious. You're throwing your life away, my mother had said during one of her rare visits, standing in my grandmother's kitchen like she was afraid to touch anything. You're 20 years old, Grace. This isn't your responsibility. But it had felt like my responsibility. My grandmother had been the one who'd taught me to read, who'd let me spend summers in her garden, who'd listened when I talked about my dreams without immediately redirecting the conversation to what was practical or impressive or socially acceptable. When she'd looked at me with confused eyes and asked, "What's your name, dear?" my heart had broken, but I'd smiled and said, "I'm Grace. I'm here to help." I'd stayed for 2 years. 2 years of watching a brilliant, vibrant woman slowly disappear into fog. 2 years of explaining over and over who I was, where we were, why the neighbors looked different than she remembered. 2 years of my parents telling anyone who asked that I'd taken some time off to find myself, their voices heavy with disappointment. What they never mentioned was that halfway through my first year with my grandmother, my college fund disappeared. I'd found out by accident calling the financial aid office to ask about re-enrollment procedures for the following fall. The administrator had been confused. "But Ms. Parker, according to our records, your parents withdrew the remaining balance last March. They submitted paperwork indicating you wouldn't be returning." $17,000. Everything that was left after my single semester of tuition and housing. When I'd called home, my mother had been matter-of-fact. Ava needed it for her pageant circuit. The entry fees, the coaching, the wardrobe. These things are expensive, Grace. And you weren't using the money anyway. She'd paused, and I could picture her sitting at the kitchen table perfectly composed. Besides, if you'd stayed in school like we wanted, this wouldn't have been an issue. I'd been too stunned to argue. Ava was 16, then, beautiful and poised and everything my parents had wanted in a daughter. Of course they'd invested in her success. Of course my abandoned education fund had seemed like a reasonable source of capital. I'd never told my grandmother. She had enough confusion, enough worry. But I think she knew something was wrong because one afternoon, during a rare moment of clarity, she'd pressed her old expense notebook into my hands. "I've been writing everything down," she'd said, her eyes sharp and focused in a way they rarely were anymore. "Every penny I spend, where it goes, what it's for. Your grandfather taught me that. Money isn't about how much you make, Gracie. It's about knowing where it goes." She'd tapped the worn leather cover. "You keep track, you stay in control. You understand?" I'd kept that notebook. After she died, after I'd sold her house and stood at her grave with my parents on either side of me, both of them dry-eyed and already discussing the estate settlement, I'd kept her notebook. I'd started my own, tracking every dollar of the inheritance, every investment, every calculated risk. Her discipline had become my foundation. Now, standing in the restaurant I'd built with the seeds she'd planted, I looked at my parents and saw them truly for the first time. Not as the authorities whose approval I'd sought my entire life. Just as two people who'd made choices, who'd valued appearance over substance, who'd seen their daughters as reflections of themselves rather than as individuals with their own worth. My mother had gone very pale. She turned to Aunt Caroline, her voice low, but not quite low enough. "We did that for your own good," Marianne said quietly, and Grace heard everything. The words hit me like a slap, sharp and casual in their cruelty. For your own good. As if taking my education fund, as if dismissing my choices, as if orchestrating this entire evening's humiliation had all been some kind of parental wisdom I was too foolish to appreciate. I turned away from my mother's conversation with Aunt Caroline and found Nora standing a few feet behind me, her face stricken with an expression I'd never seen before. Guilt. Raw, devastating guilt. "Grace," she said quietly, stepping closer so the guests wouldn't overhear. "I need to apologize. When your mother called with that request, when she specifically asked that you be assigned to serve their table, I should have refused. I should have protected you." Her voice dropped even lower. "I knew what they were doing. I knew it was meant to humiliate you, and I let it happen anyway because I thought you had some reason for allowing it. But I should have said no. I should have told them the truth right then." I looked at this woman who'd been my partner in building Maison Bissé from an empty shell into something extraordinary. Nora Chen, 53 years old, who'd worked in restaurants since she was 16, who'd climbed from dishwasher to general manager through sheer competence and relentless attention to detail. She'd never married, had devoted her life to the hospitality industry, and had told me once over late-night inventory that she'd never regretted choosing career over the conventional path everyone expected of women her generation. "Nora," I said gently, "you did exactly what I asked you to do. But I facilitated. You trusted my judgment. That's different." I touched her arm briefly. I needed to know if I could stand in this room wearing that uniform and still know who I was. "You gave me that opportunity. Don't apologize for it." Her eyes filled with tears she was too professional to let fall. "You shouldn't have had to prove anything." Maybe not, but I needed to prove it to myself. I glanced around the dining room at the staff who were still processing everything, at the guests who were starting to whisper among themselves. What I need now is for everyone to stay calm and maintain our standards. Can you help me with that? She straightened immediately, the manager in her taking over from the friend. Of course. What do you need? Make sure Marcus and Elena know that nothing changes operationally. They still report to you, you still run this floor. The only difference is now everyone knows who signs the paychecks. I kept my voice low but firm. And Nora, no one's getting fired. Not for this. I just need everyone to maintain standards and act professionally for the rest of the evening. Relief flooded her features. I'll take care of it. As she moved away to gather the staff, I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app I'd started running the moment I'd arrived at the restaurant that evening. 3 hours and 17 minutes of audio capturing every comment, every dismissive laugh, every carefully aimed barb. My father's casual cruelty to his golf buddies, my mother's performance for the Hendersons, the whispered asides about my unemployment, my failures, my disappointing life choices. I stopped the recording and saved it with today's date, then opened my email. The message from my mother requesting that I specifically be assigned to serve their table was still there, sent 2 weeks ago, with that particular tone of false sweetness she used when she wanted something. It would mean so much to Ava to have her sister there on her special day, even if Grace is working. Perhaps she could be assigned to our family table. It would be such a lovely touch. I forwarded it to my personal email, then to the encrypted cloud storage I used for important business documents. Then I scrolled back further, finding the reservation confirmation where my mother had specified, "The waitress Grace Parker should not be informed this is a family event." That one I screenshotted and saved. Evidence. Cold, clear, undeniable evidence of deliberate humiliation. I'd spent years in business learning that documentation mattered, that proof was power, that emotions without evidence were just noise. My parents had underestimated me in so many ways, but perhaps their biggest mistake was assuming I'd face this evening unprepared. My phone buzzed with a text. Ethan. I'd given him my business number months ago during our first negotiation call before either of us knew about the family connection. The message was brief. Just got call from colleague. 3 Morrison & Hale board members attended wedding as family friends. They just put pieces together. Very interested in meeting the woman behind Rowan Harbor. Should I introduce them? I looked across the room and spotted them immediately. The 3 older men in expensive suits who'd been sitting at table 9, who I'd assumed were Brandon's relatives or family friends. Board members of one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state, watching me with expressions of keen interest. This evening had started as my parents' attempt to put me in my place. It was rapidly becoming something else entirely. I typed back, "Give me 10 minutes to handle family situation first." His response came immediately. "Take your time. They're not going anywhere. This is better than any theater." A second text followed before I could put my phone away. "Also, for what it's worth. I've been in business 20 years. Never met anyone who handled a hostile situation with more grace." Pun intended. I smiled despite myself, then felt my phone buzz again with a third message from Ethan. "The board members are here, ready to start your show." I slipped my phone back into my apron pocket and turned my attention to the dining room where the initial shock was beginning to settle into uncomfortable awareness. The revelation of my identity had created a strange, suspended reality where no one quite knew how to proceed. Guests kept glancing between me and my parents, waiting for someone to provide direction, to explain how this evening should continue now that all the assumptions had been upended. My father decided to take control the way he always did when situations threatened to slip beyond his grasp. He walked to the center of the room with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention, picked up a champagne flute from the nearest table and raised it high. "Well," he said, his voice booming with forced joviality, "this has certainly been an eventful evening. But let's not forget why we're all here. We're celebrating Ava and Brandon's marriage." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled guests. "In times of change and surprise, it's important to remember our foundations, to remember who we are and where we come from." His eyes found mine across the room, and I saw the challenge there. "I'd like to propose a toast to those who know their place in this world. To those who understand that true success isn't just about what you accomplish, but about how you carry yourself, how you treat others, how you maintain dignity and grace even when circumstances are uncertain." The irony of his words would have been funny if they weren't so deliberate. He was reclaiming the narrative, positioning himself as the arbiter of proper behavior, while simultaneously taking a shot at me for disrupting his carefully constructed evening. Several guests raised their glasses uncertainly, not quite sure if they were supposed to drink. I smiled. It was the kind of smile I'd perfected in business negotiations, the one that gave away nothing while promising everything. Sophia! I called across the room to our sommelier who was standing near the wine storage with an expression of barely contained anticipation. Would you bring out the Chateau Margaux, the 2010, I think? Time to serve the premium selections. She understood immediately, her eyes lighting up with something close to delight. Of course, Ms. Parker. Which tables? All of them, I said clearly. Except the family package table. That one gets the house Cabernet as specified in the original booking contract. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Sophia disappeared into the wine cellar while I walked calmly to the service station, aware that every eye was following me. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his expression carefully neutral. The 2010 Margaux, he said quietly. That's $300 a bottle. I know. I picked up a clean wine glass, held it up to the light to check for spots. My restaurant, my wine, my decision about who gets to enjoy it. He nodded slowly, and I saw the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Understood, boss. Sophia emerged with the first bottle, handling it with the reverence it deserved. The label alone was enough to make several guests sit up straighter, their expressions shifting from confused to intrigued. Mrs. Henderson, who fancied herself a wine connoisseur, actually gasped. Is that a Chateau Margaux? She asked, leaning forward. My goodness, we had that at our 40th anniversary dinner. It was extraordinary. It is indeed, I confirmed, moving to her table with the bottle. One of the finest Bordeaux in our cellar, perfect for celebrating special occasions. I poured with practiced precision, the deep garnet liquid catching the chandelier light. Compliments of the house, of course. I moved from table to table, Sophia bringing additional bottles as needed. The Weatherbys, the Hendersons, Brandon's parents, who looked simultaneously grateful and deeply uncomfortable. The Morrison and Hale board members, who accepted their pours with knowing smiles. Ethan raised his glass to me in silent acknowledgement. At the family table, I could see my mother's face growing progressively tighter. My father had set down his champagne flute and was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Aunt Caroline whispered something to Uncle Richard, who shook his head in response. When I reached table 8, directly adjacent to my parents' table, Mr. Weatherby took a sip of his wine and closed his eyes in appreciation. Magnificent! He declared loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Grace, this is extraordinary. What a generous gesture. Only the best for our guests, I replied smoothly. Excellence is our standard at Maison Bisset. I completed my circuit of the room, every table now served with premier wine except one. The contrast was impossible to miss. Guests were starting to murmur, comparing their pours, holding their glasses up to admire the color and clarity. The Morrison and Hale board members were engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about the wine's characteristics, their voices carrying across the room. At the family table, my mother lifted her glass and took a sip. I watched her face as she recognized the difference, saw her glance at the neighboring tables with their obviously superior wine, then look back at her own glass with dawning realization. My father tried one more time to salvage his authority. Grace! He called out, his tone attempting lightness but landing somewhere closer to irritation. I think there's been a mix-up with the wine service. Perhaps you could— No mix-up, Dad, I interrupted gently. Your table received exactly what was specified in the booking contract. The family package, standard house wine with dinner service. If you'd wanted the premium selections, that would have required an upgrade. I tilted my head slightly. Of course, as the person who approved the menu and the wine pairings for this event, I assume you understood the distinction when you made your choices. The room had gone quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Expectant, almost hungry. Ava stood abruptly, her face flushed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Why are other tables being served better wine? She demanded angrily. I met my sister's furious gaze with perfect calm, the kind of composure that came from knowing exactly where I stood and what I was doing. This wasn't about petty revenge or small-minded cruelty. This was about clarity, about showing them finally what it felt like to be treated as less than. Because, I said, my voice light and professionally pleasant, this table ordered the standard package. It doesn't include upgrades. I gestured to the wine list that sat on the center of their table, the same list that had been there since the reception began. The premium wine service is listed here under additional options. You would have needed to request it when you finalized the booking contract. Ava looked like I'd slapped her. But we're family. You're my sister. I am your sister, I agreed. I'm also the owner of this establishment. And in this establishment, every customer receives exactly what they order and pay for. No more, no less. I kept my tone gentle, almost sympathetic. It's one of the reasons Maison Bissé has such an excellent reputation. Consistency, fairness, no special treatment based on personal relationships. My mother's face had gone from pale to crimson, a flush creeping up her neck and spreading across her carefully made-up features. She set her wine glass down with a sharp click against the tablecloth, her movements tight and controlled in the way they always were when she was struggling to contain her anger in public. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice low and sharp. "Grace, stop this nonsense immediately. You're embarrassing yourself and your sister on her wedding day." "I'm following the booking contract that you signed," I replied evenly. "The same contract that specified I should wear my uniform and serve your table tonight. The same contract that specified standard package service. I'm simply honoring our agreement." The silence at the family table was absolute. Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Aunt Caroline was staring at her wine glass as if it held the answers to life's great mysteries. Uncle Richard had his hand over his mouth, possibly hiding a smile. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. At the neighboring table, I heard Mrs. Weatherby whisper to her husband, "Oh my goodness, did you hear that? They specifically requested she wear the uniform and serve them." Her voice carried just enough to reach several nearby tables. "How absolutely awful!" Mr. Weatherby's response was equally audible. "And now they're upset about the wine after treating her like that. The nerve." I watched the realization spread through the room like ripples on water. The guests were beginning to understand not just that I owned the restaurant, but that my parents had deliberately orchestrated this evening to humiliate me. The champagne toasts, the seating arrangements, the request for me to serve in uniform, all of it took on a different meaning in light of the truth. The Morrison & Hale board members were watching with undisguised fascination. One of them, a distinguished man with silver hair who I recognized from the firm's website as the managing partner, leaned over to speak with Ethan. I saw Ethan nod, then pull out his phone and type something. My phone buzzed in my pocket a moment later. I didn't need to check it to know it was from him, but I glanced down anyway. "True leadership," the message read. "No need to raise voice, just quiet competence and unshakable standards. Watching you handle this is masterclass in dignity. Board members agree. One just said, that's the kind of person we want to work with." I allowed myself a small smile and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My father was standing now, his hands braced on the table, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "You've made your point, Grace," he said, his voice tight. "Very clever, very amusing. Now perhaps you could stop playing games and actually act like part of this family." "I am acting like part of this family," I said quietly. "I'm acting exactly the way you taught me to act, with clear expectations, firm boundaries, and consistent follow-through on agreements. Isn't that what you always told me? That success comes from discipline and standards?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I continued before he could speak. "You booked this restaurant knowing I worked here. You specifically requested that I serve your table in uniform. You've spent the entire evening making sure everyone knew I was just a waitress, someone who knew her place, someone who understood the natural order of things." I looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. "I gave you exactly what you asked for. The only difference is that now everyone knows the full context." My mother's hands were shaking slightly as she reached for her water glass. "You had no right to humiliate us like this." "I didn't humiliate you," I said, and for the first time I let a hint of steel enter my voice. You humiliated yourselves. I just stopped pretending not to notice. The entrance to the private dining room opened, and one of our newer staff members, a young man named David, who usually worked the host stand, stepped inside, looking uncertain. He carried a large manila envelope and was scanning the room as if unsure where to go. Nora intercepted him quickly, speaking in low tones. I saw her glance toward the family table, then nod. She took the envelope and approached my father with professional courtesy. "Excuse me, Mr. Parker," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed room. "A certified letter for Mr. Howard. It just arrived by courier. They said it was time-sensitive." My father took the envelope from Nora with hands that weren't quite steady, his earlier confidence visibly draining away. A certified letter delivered by courier to a wedding reception wasn't good news. Everyone in the room understood that much. He turned the envelope over, examining the return address, and I saw something flicker across his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. He glanced at my mother, and some wordless communication passed between them, the kind of silent exchange that came from 40 years of marriage. "It's probably just business," my mother said brightly. Too brightly, her voice pitched for the surrounding tables to hear. "Howard, why don't you look at it later? This is hardly the time." But my father was already tearing open the envelope with fingers that fumbled slightly at the seal. He pulled out several pages of official-looking documents, his eyes scanning the first page. Then the second. I watched the color drain from his face in real time, watched his shoulders tighten, watched his jaw clench so hard I thought I heard his teeth grind. "Howard." My mother's voice had lost its artificial brightness. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately, just kept staring at the papers like they might spontaneously combust if he looked at them hard enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It's from Riverside Community Bank." The name meant nothing to most of the guests, but I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Riverside Community Bank was a small regional institution that Rowan Harbor Holdings had acquired a minority stake in 18 months ago. We didn't control, it didn't manage day-to-day operations, but we had representation on the board and oversight of major lending decisions. I'd approved that investment personally, and I'd never bothered to check if my parents banked there. My mother reached for the papers, but my father held them away from her, his eyes still scanning the pages. "It's a notice of default," he said, his voice hollow. "The wedding loan. They're calling it due immediately. 60 days to pay in full, or they initiate foreclosure proceedings on the lake house." The wedding loan. I felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. "What wedding loan?" Ava's voice was small, confused. "Dad, what are you talking about?" My mother finally snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes moving rapidly over the text. "This is a mistake," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We've been making payments. We haven't missed anything." "Read the second page," my father said flatly. I watched my mother's face as she read, saw her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. "But that was the old mortgage, the one on the lake house. That was paid off 3 years ago." She looked up at him. "You told me it was paid off." "It was," he said. "But we needed capital for the wedding. Ava deserved the best. You said so yourself. The venue deposits the catering, the photographer, all of it. Do you know what a wedding like this costs?" The number on the documents was visible from where I stood. $85,000. They'd taken out an $85,000 loan to fund my sister's wedding. Ava looked like she might be sick. "You went into debt for this, Dad. I didn't know. I didn't ask for—" "Of course you didn't ask." My mother cut in, her voice sharp. "You shouldn't have to ask. You're our daughter. You deserve to have the wedding you dreamed of." She shot a venomous look in my direction, as if this were somehow my fault. My father was reading the documents again, his finger tracing down the page. "They're calling it due because we used the lake house as collateral. But the appraisal came back lower than expected. The loan-to-value ratio is out of compliance with their revised lending standards." He looked up, his eyes wild. We have 60 days to pay $85,000 or lose the house. The lake house. The place where they'd spent every summer for the past 20 years, where they entertained guests and hosted 4th of July parties and took Christmas card photos on the dock. It was as much a part of their identity as their colonial in town, maybe more so. Losing it would be a public humiliation they couldn't survive. Uncle Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Howard, I'm sure if you talk to the bank, explain the situation. The bank doesn't care about situations, my father snapped. They care about numbers, about risk assessment and loan compliance and... He trailed off, his eyes finding mine across the table. Rowan Harbor Holdings. That's the minority stakeholder mentioned in the letter. Your company. Everyone's attention swung to me. I stood very still processing this information. I owned shares in the bank that held my parents' debt, the bank that was now threatening foreclosure. This should have come across my desk and the quarterly reports should have been flagged in the risk assessment meetings. But I'd been so careful about maintaining separation between my business and my family that I'd never thought to check if they were customers of any Rowan Harbor properties. I didn't know, I said clearly. The bank's management makes lending decisions independently. I don't review individual loan files. But you could fix this. My mother's voice was desperate now, all pretense of composure abandoned. You're on the board. You have influence. You could make them extend the terms, adjust the appraisal, something. I could, I agreed, if there were legitimate grounds for modification. Legitimate grounds! My father's voice was rising now, anger overtaking panic. We're your family, your parents. That's not legitimate enough. The room was deathly silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, frozen in place like actors in a tableau. No, I said quietly. Actually, it's not. My father crumpled the notice in his fist, his face contorted with rage and fear in equal measure. He turned to my mother, his voice low and urgent. Howard gritted his teeth. Need to figure this out tonight. My parents huddled together at their table. My father's hands shaking as he smoothed out the crumpled notice, both of them speaking in urgent whispers that I couldn't quite hear. The other guests had begun to drift into small conversations, uncomfortable energy filling the space where celebration had been just hours before. Brandon stood awkwardly beside his new wife, clearly unsure whether to comfort her or give her space. I needed air. I needed a moment away from the weight of 50 pairs of eyes, from the complexity of what had just unfolded. I moved toward the side exit that led to the small courtyard behind the restaurant, the private space where staff took their breaks, and where I sometimes sat late at night reviewing financial reports under the strings of Edison lights. I'd barely made it through the door when I heard footsteps behind me. Grace, wait. Ava's voice. I turned to find my sister standing in the doorway, still in her wedding dress, her professionally styled hair starting to come loose from its pins. Her makeup was smudged slightly under her eyes. She looked younger suddenly, less like the polished bride who'd floated through the ceremony, and more like the kid sister I remembered from childhood. Can we talk? She asked. Please, just the two of us. I nodded and stepped fully into the courtyard. The cool night air was a relief after the warmth of the crowded dining room. Ava closed the door behind her, muffling the sounds from inside, and we stood there in the gentle glow of the lights, two sisters who barely knew each other anymore. I need you to understand something, she said, her voice shaking slightly. About tonight, about this restaurant. Ava, you don't have to explain. I know Mom and Dad chose... They didn't choose it, she interrupted. I did. I stared at her, not understanding. What? She wrapped her arms around herself despite the mild evening temperature. 6 months ago, I was scrolling through Facebook at work. Bored, avoiding a brief I was supposed to be writing. I found your old profile, the one you haven't updated in years. There were check-ins, dozens of them. High-end restaurants in 3 different states, always tagged at opening nights or special events, always with comments from chefs and managers thanking you for your support and partnership. My heart started beating faster. I'd forgotten about those posts made years ago before I'd learned to be more careful about my digital footprint. At first, I thought maybe you were dating someone in the restaurant industry, Ava continued. Someone successful who took you to these places. But then I started researching the restaurants themselves. 3 of them had the same parent company listed in their business filings, Rowan Harbor Holdings. She looked at me directly. It took me about 2 hours to figure out that you weren't just working in restaurants. You owned them. Why didn't you say anything? I asked quietly. Because I was angry. Her voice cracked slightly. I was so angry, Grace. All those years of them comparing us, of holding me up as the example while putting you down. All those dinners where Dad would sigh about your wasted potential and Mom would change the subject when her friends asked about you. And the whole time you were building an empire and just not telling anyone. I had my reasons. I know you did. I figured that out too. She turned away, looking up at the lights strung overhead. When I got engaged, Mom immediately started planning this massive wedding, the kind that makes a statement, she kept saying, the kind that shows everyone what the Parker family is capable of producing. She wanted the country club, but I told her I wanted Maison Bissé. Understanding was dawning slowly like sunrise through fog. You knew I worked here. I knew you owned it, Ava corrected. I wanted Mom and Dad to have to come here to your restaurant and see you in that uniform and feel superior and smug. Because I knew that somehow the truth would come out. Maybe not like this, maybe not tonight, but eventually they'd realize what they'd missed. Who you actually were. She laughed a bitter sound. I wanted them to face the truth about their perfect daughter versus their failure daughter. Except the failure was the one who actually succeeded. I felt something shift in my chest, some long-held assumption about my sister beginning to crack. Ava, why would you do that? Why would you want your own wedding to be the stage for... Because I'm exhausted, she said, turning back to me with tears streaming down her face, carving tracks through her carefully applied makeup. I'm so exhausted being who they want me to be. The words hung between us in the quiet courtyard, and I saw in my sister's face something I'd never allowed myself to look for before. Not rivalry or superiority, but exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of performing a role for so long that you'd forgotten who you were underneath. Ava, I started, but she shook her head. I need to get back inside. Brandon's probably panicking, but I needed you to know that this tonight, it wasn't about hurting you. It was about finally stopping the lie. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. I'm sorry it happened this way. I'm sorry for all of it. Before I could respond, the courtyard door opened again, and Nora appeared looking apologetic. Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent and can't wait. I glanced at Ava, who nodded. Go. We can talk more later. She slipped past Nora and back into the dining room, leaving me standing alone under the Edison lights. Who is it? I asked Nora. A lawyer. He says he's from the estate of Eleanor Hartfield. She paused. Your grandmother's estate. My grandmother had been dead for 8 years. Her estate had been settled long ago, the house sold, the modest savings distributed. There shouldn't be anything left to discuss. I followed Nora back inside and found a man waiting near the restaurant's main entrance, away from the private dining room. He was elderly, maybe 75, with silver hair and the kind of well-worn suit that spoke of decades in a profession rather than current fashion. He held a leather briefcase and stood with the patient stillness of someone accustomed to waiting. Ms. Parker. He extended his hand. James Carmichael. I was your grandmother's attorney for 32 years. Mr. Carmichael. I shook his hand, confused. I thought the estate was closed years ago. It was. This isn't about the estate exactly. He glanced around the busy restaurant entrance. Is there somewhere we could speak privately? I led him to my office, a small room off the kitchen that smelled perpetually of coffee and fresh bread. He settled into the chair across from my desk and opened his briefcase with careful, deliberate movements. I apologize for the timing, he said. But when I heard about tonight's event at this location, I felt it was perhaps providential. Your grandmother left something with me with very specific instructions about when it should be delivered." He pulled out a large manila envelope thick with contents. "She asked that I give this to you only when certain conditions were met. Specifically when your parents attempted to leverage your success for their own benefit." My mouth went dry. She knew back then, she knew they would. Eleanor was a remarkably perceptive woman, even as her memory failed her. He set the envelope on my desk. She had moments of extraordinary clarity, particularly in the last few months before she passed. During one of those moments, she came to my office and gave me this. She said, "James, my granddaughter is going to be someone important, and when she is, her parents are going to try to take credit or take advantage. When that happens, she needs to know the truth." I stared at the envelope, not wanting to touch it, afraid of what truth my grandmother had thought I needed. "Open it," Mr. Carmichael said gently. "I'll wait." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside were dozens of documents, all organized with the meticulous care my grandmother had brought to everything. The first section was bank statements going back 15 years, my parents' accounts. I recognized the account numbers from the few times I'd sent money transfers during my years caring for her. I started reading, my eyes moving faster as comprehension dawned. There were no scholarship deposits. Not to Ava, not to anyone. I went through every statement from the years my parents had claimed to be paying for Ava's pageant circuit with my college fund. Nothing. No withdrawals matching what a scholarship would cost, no transfers to pageant organizations, no payments to coaches or coordinators. But there were other payments. Monthly debt service to multiple credit cards, mortgage payments, car loans, the normal expenses of a family living slightly beyond their means and using credit to bridge the gap. The second section was worse. Copies of money transfers I'd made to my parents during the 2 years I'd lived with my grandmother. $300 a month at first, then $500, then sometimes more when they called with emergencies. Over 2 years I'd sent them nearly $15,000 from the part-time jobs I'd worked while caring for her. The final document was a spreadsheet in my grandmother's handwriting comparing my transfers to their debt payments. The amounts matched almost exactly. Every dollar I'd sent had gone directly to paying down their credit cards and loans. Attached to the spreadsheet was a note in her shaky script. "Gracie, you worked yourself to exhaustion to help them. They told you it was for Ava's education. It was for their mistakes. Keep this. You'll need it someday to remember that your kindness wasn't wasted, just misdirected. Love, Grandma." I sat back in my chair, the papers spread across my desk like evidence at a trial. Mr. Carmichael watched me with sympathetic eyes. "She wanted you to know," he said quietly, "that you weren't crazy, that your memories of sacrifice were real, and that the way they rewrote history wasn't your fault." I gathered the documents carefully, my hands steadier now despite the rage building in my chest. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but something colder and more focused. The kind of anger that came from finally having proof that you weren't wrong, that you hadn't imagined the betrayal. Grace closed the envelope. "Time to end this." Mr. Carmichael reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a second set of documents, these ones looking more official with legal seals and notarized signatures. "There's more," he said quietly. "Your grandmother asked me to investigate the scholarship claim after you mentioned it to her. She hired a private investigator, actually. Paid him out of her own savings to verify what she already suspected." He laid the documents in front of me one by one like a prosecutor building a case. The first was a formal inquiry to the Miss Teen America pageant organization dated 14 years ago. The investigator had asked for records of any scholarship payments made to Ava Marie Parker between the years I'd been told my college fund was being redirected. The response was brief and definitive. No scholarships had been awarded to anyone by that name during those years. Pageant contestants paid entry fees. They didn't receive scholarships to participate. The second document was even more damning. A credit report for Howard and Marianne Parker from 15 years ago, right around the time I'd dropped out of college. It showed a financial picture that made my stomach turn. maxed out credit cards, a second mortgage on the house that I'd never known about, multiple late payments, a credit score in the low 500s. My parents hadn't just been living beyond their means, they'd been drowning. "They declared bankruptcy 6 months after you left college," Mr. Carmichael said, tapping a legal filing that showed the Chapter 13 reorganization. "Your grandmother found this in the public records. They'd been hiding their financial situation for years, apparently. The second mortgage, the credit cards, all of it came crashing down right around the time you turned 18. I stared at the dates, feeling pieces of my life rearrange themselves into a completely different picture. I was 18 when Grandma started getting sick. When I came home to help her, they told me she was exaggerating, that she was fine on her own. "Your grandmother wasn't fine, but that's not why they wanted you home," he said gently. "They needed you to work, to contribute to the household. They were in bankruptcy proceedings and couldn't afford to support a college student when they could barely support themselves." The next document was a series of bank statements from my parents' checking account during the 2 years I'd lived with my grandmother. I saw the deposits from my paychecks, the money I'd transferred electronically every month because they'd told me things were tight, that they needed help, that Ava's pageant expenses were more than expected. Every single deposit was followed within days by payments to creditors: the bankruptcy trustee, credit card companies, the mortgage company. My money hadn't gone to Ava's fictional scholarship. It had gone to keeping my parents from losing everything. "But they told everyone," I said, my voice hollow. "They told the whole family that I dropped out because I was lazy, because I couldn't handle college, because I was irresponsible." Mr. Carmichael pulled out another document, this one a collection of printed emails and social media messages that the investigator had somehow obtained. I recognized my mother's writing style immediately. One email to Aunt Caroline. "We're so disappointed in Grace. She had every opportunity and just threw it away. We offered to keep paying for school, but she insisted on leaving. We think she just wasn't mature enough for the responsibility." A Facebook post from my father during that same period. "Sometimes as parents we do everything right, and our kids still make poor choices. Praying for wisdom as we deal with Grace's decision to abandon her education." A text message thread between my mother and her sister. "Grace dropped out and is living with Howard's mother now. Honestly, it's probably for the best. She wasn't cut out for college anyway. At least this way she can be useful taking care of Eleanor." I read through them all, each one a small knife-cut death by 1,000 casual lies. They'd rewritten the entire narrative. In their version, they were the disappointed parents trying to support a wayward daughter. There was no mention of their bankruptcy. No acknowledgement that they'd pressured me to come home. No hint that they'd taken my college fund to pay their debts while telling me it was funding Ava's success. "Your grandmother was furious when she found all this," Mr. Carmichael said. "She wanted to confront them immediately, but her lucidity was becoming unreliable. Some days she'd remember everything clearly. Other days she couldn't remember having hired the investigator at all. So she decided to document everything and leave it with me with instructions to give it to you when the time was right." I turned to the last page in the stack and found a letter in my grandmother's handwriting, more steady than the note I'd seen earlier, written during one of her clear periods. "My dearest Gracie," it began. "If you're reading this, then your parents have finally shown their true colors in a way you can't ignore anymore. I'm writing this on a good day when I remember everything clearly. I need you to know what I discovered about the scholarship lie. I warned you not to trust them, but you still sent money home." I read the rest of my grandmother's letter twice, letting her words sink in past the shock and anger. She'd known. She'd seen through their manipulations even as her own mind was failing her, and she'd loved me enough to make sure I'd eventually have the proof I needed. The letter ended with a single line that made my eyes burn. "Don't let them make you cruel, sweetheart. Be strong, be fair, but don't become what they are." I carefully returned all the documents to the envelope and looked up at Mr. Carmichael. "Thank you for keeping this safe all these years." "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said, standing. "She believed in you completely. I hope you know that. He handed me his card. "If you need anything, any legal support or documentation, please call me." After he left, I sat alone in my office for several minutes, the envelope on my desk like a loaded weapon. I could go back into that dining room right now and detonate everything. Show the guests the proof of my parents' lies, watch their carefully constructed reputation crumble in real time. Part of me wanted that. The 18-year-old girl who'd been called lazy and irresponsible wanted vindication so badly it felt like hunger. But my grandmother's words echoed, "Don't become what they are." I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Not with emotion, not with public humiliation for its own sake, but with clear expectations and fair terms. The way a real leader would handle it. My phone buzzed. A text from Nora. "Staff asking questions. What should I tell them?" I typed back quickly. "Tell them the truth that I'm the owner, but emphasize nothing changes operationally. Same management structure, same standards, same expectations. No panic, no drama. Business as usual." Her response came immediately. "Understood. They're relieved, actually. Marcus said he knew something was different about you." I smiled slightly despite everything and returned to my laptop. The document I was creating needed a name. Something formal enough to have weight, but clear enough to be understood. I titled it Amends Plan and began outlining terms. First section. Public Acknowledgement. Howard and Marianne Parker would issue a written statement to family and close friends, acknowledging that they had misrepresented the circumstances of my departure from college, that I had left to care for my grandmother rather than due to laziness or immaturity, and that they had used my college fund to pay their personal debts without my knowledge or consent. Second section. Financial restitution. They would establish a scholarship fund in Eleanor Hartfield's name, with an initial contribution of $50,000, the approximate value of my college fund adjusted for inflation. The scholarship would be awarded annually to young women from working-class families pursuing careers in hospitality or business management. Third section, personal terms. They would cease all public and private commentary about my life choices, career, or character. Any future family events involving my presence would be conducted with basic respect and courtesy, or I would not attend. Fourth section, consequences. Failure to comply with any term would result in the public release of all documentation provided by Mr. Carmichael, as well as my full cooperation with any investigations into their financial dealings, past or present. I read through it 3 times, adjusting language, ensuring everything was clear and enforceable. This wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing boundaries, demanding accountability, and creating terms for a relationship that had been broken for as long as I could remember. My office door opened and Nora slipped inside. "The private dining room on the second floor is empty. I've had it set up as a conference room with the table and chairs from storage." She paused. "Should I send your parents up?" "Not yet. I need a few more minutes." I saved the document and pulled up my email attaching the amends plan as a PDF. Then I drafted a brief message to my parents with a copy to my personal attorney, whose number I kept on speed dial for exactly these kinds of situations. The email was simple. "Howard and Marianne, we need to discuss the future of our relationship. Private dining room, second floor, 30 minutes. Come alone. Bring your reading glasses. This is a business meeting." I hit send and sat back in my chair, my heart pounding but my hands steady. Nora was watching me with an expression somewhere between concern and pride. "You're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this," I confirmed. "But I'm doing it my way, not with screaming or public scenes, with terms and boundaries and consequences." I stood smoothing my uniform one last time before I changed out of it. "Can you make sure no one interrupts us upstairs? Not staff, not guests, no one." "Consider it done." She turned to leave, then paused. "Grace, your grandmother would be proud of you." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. I'd almost forgotten he was still out there watching this entire drama unfold. His message was brief and perfectly timed. "Conference room is ready. Time to make your move." I changed out of my uniform in the staff bathroom, pulling on the black blazer and slacks I kept in my office for unexpected business meetings. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone different from the woman who'd arrived at the restaurant hours earlier. Not harder, exactly. Just clearer. More certain of who I was and what I was worth. The second-floor private dining room had been transformed exactly as I'd requested. The round tables were gone, replaced by a single long conference table with 3 chairs on one side and one on the other. Nora had even found a small projector, which sat ready to display documents if needed. The room felt less like a celebration space and more like what it was, a boardroom for difficult negotiations. I was reviewing my notes when I heard footsteps on the stairs. My parents appeared in the doorway, both of them looking diminished somehow without the audience of wedding guests. My father's face was still flushed with anger and wine. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup no longer perfect. "What is this?" my father demanded, gesturing at the setup. "Grace, your sister's wedding is still happening downstairs. This is completely inappropriate." "Sit down, please," I said, my voice level and professional. "This won't take long if you cooperate." My mother moved to one of the chairs, sinking into it like her legs couldn't quite hold her anymore. My father remained standing for a moment longer, trying to maintain some semblance of authority before finally taking the seat beside her. I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector. The first image that appeared on the wall was the pageant organization's letter confirming no scholarships had been awarded to Ava Parker. "Let's start with the scholarship," I said. "The one you claimed required my entire college fund. The one that supposedly gave Ava opportunities for her future." I looked at them directly. "It never existed." My mother's hand went to her throat. "Grace, I don't know where you got that information, but from a private investigator hired by Grandma Eleanor 8 years ago," I interrupted. "She knew you were lying. She documented everything." I clicked to the next slide, their bankruptcy filing. "This is what was really happening when I was 18. You were drowning in debt. The house was over-leveraged, your credit cards were maxed out, and you were 6 months away from losing everything." My father's jaw clenched. "Our financial situation was none of your concern." "It became my concern when you made me part of the solution," I said, clicking through to the bank statements showing my deposits. 2 years of paychecks. $15,000 sent home because you told me the family needed help. Because you said Ava's expenses were more than expected. I let that sink in. Every dollar went to your creditors, not to Ava, to pay for your mistakes. "We were trying to protect you," my mother said, her voice breaking. "You were so young. We didn't want you to know how bad things were. So instead you told everyone I was lazy and irresponsible. You let the whole family believe I'd thrown away my education because I couldn't handle the work." I clicked to the next slides, the emails, the social media posts, the carefully constructed lies. "You destroyed my reputation to protect yours." My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough of this. We made difficult choices during a difficult time. We don't owe you an explanation 15 years later." "Actually, you do." I closed the laptop and slid 2 printed copies of the amends plan across the table. "You have 2 choices. Option 1, you sign this agreement. You issue a public apology acknowledging the truth about my college departure. You establish a scholarship fund in Grandma's name. You agree to basic standards of respectful behavior going forward." "And option 2, my father asked, his voice dangerous. "Option 2, I release all of this documentation to the family, to your social circle, and to anyone else who might be interested in the real story of Howard and Marianne Parker's financial collapse and subsequent fraud." I met his eyes without flinching. "I also contact the bank about your current loan and share my concerns about the accuracy of the financial information you provided. And I make sure every business associate, every country club member, every person who's ever admired your success knows exactly how you built that success on the backs of your daughters." My mother was crying now, tears running unchecked down her face. "How can you do this to us? We're your parents. You're my parents who stole my education, lied about me for 15 years, and tonight tried to humiliate me at my own restaurant." My voice was cold now, all the warmth burned away by years of accumulated hurt. "I'm giving you a chance to make it right. That's more than you ever gave me." My father picked up the agreement, his hands shaking with rage. "This is extortion." "This is accountability," I corrected. "Something you've never had to face before." He threw the papers back on the table. "If you do this, you're no longer family," Howard said, his voice tight with fury. I stood gathering my laptop and documents with calm, deliberate movements. "Then redefine family," Grace replied. I was halfway to the door when my mother's voice stopped me, raw and broken in a way I'd never heard before. "Because you did it," she said. I turned back. She was still sitting at the conference table, mascara streaking her face. Her hands pressed flat against the polished wood, as if trying to hold herself together through sheer physical contact. "Did what?" I asked. "Everything I couldn't." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Everything I gave up. Everything I was told I couldn't have because I was a woman, because I was a wife, because I had responsibilities." She looked up at me with eyes full of something I'd never seen there before. Not anger, anguish. "You became exactly what I dreamed of being, and every time I see you, it's like looking at the ghost of who I could have been." My father made a dismissive sound. "Marianne, don't be dramatic. This isn't the time for—" "Shut up, Howard," she said, and the words were so unexpected, so unlike her usual deference, that he actually fell silent. "Just shut up for once in your life and let me speak." I moved back to the table, slowly pulled out my chair and sat down. "I'm listening." She drew a shaky breath, her fingers twisting the wedding ring she'd worn for 40 years. "I was 23 when I met your father. I'd just graduated from culinary school in Boston. Top of my class. I had a business plan investors who were interested, a location scouted in the North End." Her voice took on a distant quality, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. "I was going to open a French bistro, nothing huge, just intimate, 30 seats, classic technique, seasonal ingredients, perfect execution." The air in the room had changed. Even my father seemed frozen, staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "But I met Howard at a fundraiser and he was charming and successful and he said all the right things. We got engaged after 6 months. I showed him my business plan on our 3rd date." She laughed a bitter sound. "He smiled and said it was adorable, that it was sweet I had hobbies, that once we were married and started a family I'd be too busy to worry about restaurants." "Mom," I said quietly. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. Nobody knew. Because I did what good women of my generation were supposed to do. I canceled the lease. I returned the investors' money. I put my culinary school diploma in a box in the attic, and I became Mrs. Howard Parker." She finally looked at my father, and the expression on her face was devastating. "And you know what he said on our wedding night? He said, 'See, you don't need a restaurant. You just need to cook for me.'" My father's face had gone white. "That's not fair, Marianne. It was a different time. You understood that women with families couldn't what? Couldn't be ambitious? Couldn't want something beyond taking care of everyone else's needs." Her voice was rising now, years of suppressed rage finally finding voice. "I spent 30 years making dinner parties and charity luncheons, pretending that catering junior league events was the same thing as running my own kitchen. Smiling while other women opened restaurants and won James Beard Awards, and did everything I dreamed of doing." She turned back to me, and I saw tears streaming down her face unchecked. "And then you dropped out of college, and I thought good. She's like me. She'll understand that dreams are just fantasies, that real life is about duty and sacrifice. But you didn't stay down. You went to Grandma's house and you took care of her, and somehow you still found a way to build something." Her voice broke completely. "And it wasn't just any restaurant. It was French fine dining. It was intimate and elegant and everything I'd planned down to the last detail, except it was yours instead of mine. Understanding crashed over me like a wave. That's why you hate Maison Bissé. I don't hate it, she whispered. I hate that you got to have it when I never did. I hate that you're 33 and you've already accomplished what I gave up at 23. I hate that when I walk through those doors, I see every choice I didn't make, every dream I let your father convince me was unrealistic. The room was silent, except for her ragged breathing. My father looked smaller somehow, his bluster deflated by his wife's confession. The request that I wear the uniform and serve you, I said slowly. That wasn't just about putting me in my place, was it? It was about proving to yourself that I was just a waitress, not an owner. Not someone who'd actually achieved what you couldn't. She nodded, unable to speak. I opened my laptop, my hands moving with purpose now. I pulled up the scanned copies of the recipe collection I'd used to develop Maison Bissé's menu, the handwritten cards that had been tucked into my grandmother's old cookbook. I turned the screen toward my mother. The French recipes I use, I said quietly, watching her face as recognition dawned. I found them in grandmother's old cookbook, with your handwriting on it. My mother stared at the screen, her hand reaching out to touch the image of her own handwriting from 3 decades ago. Coq au vin, bouillabaisse, tarte tatin. The recipes she'd developed in culinary school, refined and perfected, then hidden away in my grandmother's kitchen, where no one would think to look for them. She kept them, my mother whispered. Mom kept my recipes. She told me they were hers, I said quietly. When I was learning to cook, trying to figure out what Maison Bissé should be, she pulled out that cookbook and said, "These are the dishes that matter, the ones made with love and precision. I built my entire menu around your dream, Mom. I just didn't know it was yours." The silence that followed was profound. My father sat motionless, perhaps finally understanding the full scope of what his dismissiveness had cost, not just his wife, but both his daughters. My mother covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. I stood closing the laptop. You have until tomorrow morning to decide about the amends plan. I'll be in my office at 9. I looked at both of them. But understand this, whether you sign or not, I'm done letting your opinion of me dictate how I see myself. I'm done carrying the weight of your disappointments and your regrets and your unfulfilled dreams. I left them sitting there and made my way back downstairs, my heart pounding but my mind clear. The private dining room had evolved in my absence. The wedding guests had loosened their ties and kicked off their heels, the formal reception transitioning into the relaxed celebration that always happened once the speeches were done and the champagne had worked its magic. But there was an undercurrent of tension, everyone aware that something significant had happened, that the evening's revelations had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the Parker family. I was headed toward the kitchen to check on Marcel when I felt a hand on my arm. Ethan stood there, his expression serious. "The board members would like to say something," he said quietly. "If you're comfortable with it, they think the moment calls for it." "What kind of something?" "A toast. An acknowledgement." He paused. "A correction of the record." I looked across the room and saw the 3 Morrison and Hale board members standing together near the center of the space, their posture formal, their faces set with purpose. The managing partner, whose name I now remembered was Richard Donovan, caught my eye and gave a small, respectful nod. "All right," I said. "Let them speak." Ethan moved to the center of the room and raised his hand for attention. The conversations died down gradually, guests turning with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Ava and Brandon stood near the windows, her hand in his, both of them looking exhausted by the emotional whiplash of their own wedding. "Excuse me, everyone," Ethan said, his lawyer's voice carrying easily across the space. "I know this has been an unusual evening, but I think there are some things that need to be said and said properly." He gestured to Richard Donovan. "Mr. Donovan has asked to say a few words." The managing partner stepped forward, his silver hair catching the chandelier light, his bearing that of someone accustomed to speaking with authority. "Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Donovan, managing partner at Morrison & Hale. I've had the privilege of working with some of the finest legal minds and business leaders in this state over my 40-year career." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. 3 months ago, our firm was retained to handle a complex commercial real estate acquisition. Multiple properties across state lines, intricate financing structures, regulatory compliance issues in 3 different jurisdictions. It was the kind of deal that separates competent business people from truly exceptional ones. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My parents had emerged from upstairs and stood at the back of the crowd. My mother's face still blotchy from crying. My father's expression unreadable. "Our client was Rowan Harbor Holdings," Donovan continued, "a privately held investment company that had frankly outmaneuvered several much larger competitors to secure these properties. The CEO and founder of Rowan Harbor demonstrated a level of strategic thinking, financial acumen, and negotiating skill that impressed even our most senior partners." He turned to face me directly. "That CEO is Grace Parker, or as she's known in the business community, Grace Rowan, President and Chairman of Rowan Harbor Holdings." He began to applaud, a slow, deliberate clapping that carried weight and respect. The other 2 board members joined him immediately. Then Ethan, then Marcus and Sophia and Elena, and the rest of my staff who understood better than anyone what this moment meant. Then Mrs. Henderson, tears in her eyes, then the Weatherbys, then Aunt Caroline and Uncle Richard, who'd watched me grow up and had apparently never questioned my parents' narrative until tonight. The applause built like a wave, and suddenly the entire room was standing, 50 people rising to their feet in acknowledgement of something that had been hidden for too long. I stood in the center of it, overwhelmed by the unexpected validation, by the public recognition I'd told myself I didn't need, but apparently had been starving for all along. Through the crowd, I saw my parents. My father stood rigid, his hands at his sides, not clapping. But my mother slowly, hesitantly raised her hands and joined the applause. Her face was wet with tears, her expression some complicated mixture of grief and pride and regret that I couldn't fully parse. Donovan waited for the applause to die down before continuing. "In business, we talk a lot about leadership, about vision and execution and the ability to build something from nothing, but what we witnessed tonight was something rarer. We saw someone who had every right to respond with anger and vindictiveness instead choose dignity and restraint." He looked at me with unmistakable respect. "Ms. Rowan Maison Bissay is not just a successful restaurant. It's a testament to what's possible when talent meets determination, when someone refuses to let others' limited vision define their potential." The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Ethan caught my eye and smiled, a genuine expression of admiration and something that might have been friendship or might have been the beginning of something more. When the noise finally subsided, I knew I had to say something. I stepped forward, very aware that I was still wearing my business clothes instead of my uniform, that I was being seen clearly for perhaps the first time by people who'd known me my entire life. "Thank you," I said, and my voice was steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "That's incredibly kind. But I want to be clear about something. Working as a server, wearing that uniform, carrying trays, and pouring wine, that didn't diminish me. Service isn't beneath anyone. The people who work in this industry, who make hospitality their calling, they're skilled professionals who deserve respect." I looked at Marcus, at Sophia, at Elena. Tonight I served in the truest sense, just as they taught me. The uniform doesn't define the person. Character does. The applause that followed was different, warmer somehow, and I saw several of my staff members wipe at their eyes. But before I could step back, before the moment could end, a woman I didn't recognize pushed through the crowd. She was young, maybe 30, with a press badge clipped to her jacket and a phone already recording. "Ms. Rowan," she said, her voice eager and professional. "I'm Jennifer Marks from the Business Journal. Are you available for an interview? I looked at Jennifer Marks and her recording phone at the eager anticipation in her eyes, at the way the other guests had suddenly gone quiet again, waiting to see what would happen next. This was the moment where I could cement my victory, where I could give an interview that would spread through social media and business networks, where I could publicly detail every wrong my parents had committed and watch their reputation crumble in real time. "No," I said simply, "I'm not available for an interview. Not tonight." Confusion flickered across her face. "But Ms. Rowan, this is an incredible story. Self-made entrepreneur family drama, the revelation at a wedding reception. Our readers would be fascinated by—" "I'm sure they would," I interrupted gently. "But this is my sister's wedding day. Whatever issues exist between me and my parents, Ava deserves to have her celebration be about her marriage, not about family conflict." I glanced at my sister, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. No one deserves to be humiliated on their child's wedding day, no matter what's happened between us. The reporter looked disappointed but professional. "I understand. Perhaps we could schedule something for next week. The business community would love to hear about Rowan Harbor Holdings' expansion plans, and you can contact my office through the website," I said, effectively ending the conversation. "Thank you for understanding." She nodded and stepped back, though I noticed she didn't stop recording. I'd have to be careful about that, make sure my attorney sent a polite but firm request that nothing from tonight be published without my explicit consent. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, I had something else I needed to do. I found Nora near this kitchen entrance, her tablet in hand as she monitored the evening's final details. "What was the total revenue for tonight's event?" I asked quietly. She pulled up the figures without hesitation. $82,400. That includes the reception package, the wine service, the upgraded florals, and the additional rentals. Almost exactly the amount of my parents' debt. The symmetry was almost too perfect. "I want to donate it," I said. "All of it. Tonight's profits go to a charitable fund." Nora's eyes widened slightly. "All of it, Grace, that's a significant amount." "I know. Set up a fund for unemployed or underemployed middle-aged women trying to re-enter the workforce or start their own businesses. Women who gave up careers for family, who were told their dreams were hobbies, who need a second chance." I paused, thinking about my mother's confession upstairs about all the Marianne Parkers in the world who'd been convinced to make themselves smaller. "Call it the Ava Parker Educational Fund. Make it about new beginnings." "After your sister?" Nora asked carefully. "After my sister," I confirmed. "Who's starting a new chapter of her life tonight, and who deserves to have something good associated with her name instead of just being remembered as the bride at the wedding where everything fell apart?" Nora made notes on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. "That's generous, Grace. Really generous." "It's strategic," I corrected, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. "Ava chose this restaurant deliberately, trying to force the truth into the open. The least I can do is make sure something positive comes from it." I glanced across the room to where my sister stood with Brandon, both of them looking exhausted. And maybe it'll help her understand that she doesn't have to be perfect, that there's value in being real even when it's messy. I felt someone approach from behind and turned to find Ethan 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered me one and I took it gratefully. "That was well played," he said quietly, nodding toward where the reporter was packing up her equipment. "Most people in your position would have jumped at the publicity. Most people in my position probably aren't watching their mother have a breakdown over dreams she gave up 30 years ago," I replied, taking a sip of the wine. It was the Chateau Margaux, I noticed. The good stuff. "I heard about the donation," Ethan said. "Nora mentioned it to one of the board members who mentioned it to me. $82,000 to a women's fund named after your sister." He studied my face with that assessing look I'd come to recognize from our business negotiations. "You could have destroyed your parents tonight. You had every piece of ammunition you needed. Instead, you gave them terms for reconciliation and donated a small fortune to help other women." "Is there a question in there somewhere?" I asked. "Not a question, an observation." He raised his glass slightly. You won, Grace. In the kindest way possible. That's rare. In business and family conflicts, in any arena where power dynamics are involved, people usually win by crushing their opponents. You won by maintaining your integrity. I thought about what winning actually meant. My parents were upstairs somewhere, hopefully reading through the amends plan, hopefully beginning to understand that accountability wasn't the same as destruction. My sister was slowly starting to recognize that she didn't have to be the perfect daughter to be worthy of love. And I was standing in my own restaurant, surrounded by people who finally saw me clearly, with the freedom to define myself on my own terms. I'm not sure it's winning, I said slowly. It's more like setting boundaries, refusing to participate in their version of reality anymore. That's what winning looks like when you're playing a different game than everyone else, Ethan replied. Before I could respond, I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. My mother had approached Jennifer Marks near the entrance, her hand on the reporter's arm, her face animated as she leaned in close to speak. The reporter's expression shifted from polite dismissal to sharp interest, and I saw her reach for her phone again. Ethan followed my gaze and frowned. Is your mother? I was already moving across the room, but I wasn't fast enough. The reporter's phone was recording again, and my mother's voice carried just enough for me to hear the words that made my blood run cold. Marianne whispered to the reporter, I'll tell you the truth about this fake president. I reached my mother in 3 strides, but the damage was already being done. Jennifer Marks's eyes were bright with the kind of journalistic hunger that came from stumbling onto a story bigger than expected. My mother's voice was low but urgent, the words tumbling out with the desperate energy of someone who'd been backed into a corner and saw only one way out. She didn't build anything, my mother was saying, her hand still gripping the reporter's arm. The money came from her grandmother's estate. Grace was just a waitress who got lucky with an inheritance. She's been playing dress-up as a businesswoman, pretending she earned something that was handed to her. Mrs. Parker, I said quietly, and both women turned to look at me. I think you should stop talking now. My mother's eyes were wild. Mascara smudged her carefully maintained composure, completely shattered. Why? So you can keep perpetuating this fantasy. So everyone can keep believing you're some self-made success story, when the truth is, you just had a rich grandmother. Jennifer Marks's phone was still recording, capturing every word. I could see her mind working, already crafting the headline, Restaurant Owner's Mother Claims Success, Built on Inheritance Not Merit. Ms. Marks, I said, shifting my attention to the reporter. Whatever my mother tells you tonight is being said under extreme emotional duress at her daughter's wedding reception. I strongly suggest you verify any claims before publishing, and I'd recommend speaking to my attorney before running any story that involves my business or personal finances. I'm a journalist, Ms. Rowan, she replied, professional but unmoved. If there are questions about the origin of your company's capital, that's a legitimate business story. There are no questions, I said evenly. There are facts which are documented and verifiable, and there's a woman who's had a difficult evening making statements she'll regret tomorrow. I looked at my mother. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't do what? Tell the truth. Her voice was rising now, drawing attention from nearby guests. You want to know the truth? Ms. Marks Grace dropped out of college because she couldn't handle it. She lived with her grandmother for 2 years doing nothing productive. Then when her grandmother died and left her money, she suddenly became an entrepreneur. She laughed bitterly. It's easy to be successful when someone hands you $200,000. I felt Ethan move to stand beside me, a quiet show of support. Across the room I saw Nora watching with concern, her phone already in her hand, probably texting our attorney. The Morrison and Hale board members had noticed the commotion and were moving closer, their expressions shifting from celebration to professional alertness. Mrs. Parker? Jennifer Marks said, her reporter's instincts fully engaged now. Are you saying your daughter misrepresented how she built her business? I'm saying she had advantages she's not acknowledging, my mother replied. I'm saying the whole self-made woman narrative is a fiction. She's not some business genius. She's a waitress who inherited money and hired people to tell her what to do with it. The words should have hurt. A few hours ago, they would have devastated me. But standing there watching my mother self-destruct in real time, I felt something unexpected pity. "Are you finished?" I asked quietly. She stared at me, breathing hard, and I saw the moment she realized what she'd done. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something that looked like horror. But it was too late. The reporter had everything on tape. The guests were whispering. The story was already writing itself. "I'm going to step outside," I said to Ethan. "Can you make sure the reception continues and ask Nora to handle the reporter, please? Standard protocol. No comment until we've consulted legal." He nodded, already moving into action. I walked toward the exit with my head high and my spine straight, aware of every eye following me. I made it to the courtyard before my phone started buzzing. The first text was from my attorney. "Saw the live stream. Someone's recording and it's on social already. Call me." Live stream. Of course. In an age where everyone had a phone and social media accounts, privacy at a public event was an illusion. I opened Twitter and searched my name. The videos were already there, posted by guests I barely knew. Short clips of my mother's accusations, helpfully captioned with speculation and commentary. Local restaurant owner called out by own mother. Inheritance or hard work? The truth about Grace Parker's success. Family drama at wedding reveals business empire built on grandmother's money. I watched the engagement numbers climb. Retweets, comments, shares. The narrative was being written in real time, and it wasn't the one I would have chosen. My phone rang. My attorney, Patricia Chen, didn't bother with pleasantries. "How bad is it?" "My mother just told a reporter that I'm a fake businesswoman living off inheritance money, at my sister's wedding, on camera, and apparently someone was live streaming it." Christ, I heard typing in the background. "Okay, here's what we do. Don't respond to anything on social media. Don't talk to any reporters. Don't make any statements until we've crafted a response." Patricia, everything she said is technically true. I did inherit money from my grandmother. I did use it as seed capital. "Inheriting seed capital isn't the same as being handed a business," she said firmly. "You turned $200,000 into a multi-million-dollar portfolio. That's skill, not luck. But we need to control this narrative before it gets away from us." I leaned against the courtyard wall, feeling the cool brick against my back. "Let them talk," I heard myself say. "Let the story spread. Let people speculate and doubt and question, and then I'll speak once and clearly." Grace, that's risky. The longer misinformation circulates, the more impact the truth will have when I finally share it. I finished. I've spent 15 years being quiet about my accomplishments. Maybe it's time I stopped apologizing for my success, whether it started with an inheritance or not. She was quiet for a moment. "You want to go public? Full transparency?" "I want to tell my story, the whole story, without shame or defensiveness. Yes, my grandmother left me money. Yes, I used it to start my business. But I also turned that money into something substantial through years of work and smart decisions. Both things can be true." "All right," Patricia said, and I could hear the shift in her tone from caution to strategy. "Let me set something up. A proper press conference, controlled environment, prepared statement. Give me until morning." I hung up and stood in the quiet courtyard, listening to the muffled sounds of the reception continuing inside. My phone buzzed with an incoming email. Patricia moving fast as always. The subject line read simply, "Press conference tomorrow morning. Prepare to go." I woke at 6 after 3 hours of fitful sleep, my mind still replaying my mother's words on an endless loop. The videos had multiplied overnight. By the time I checked my phone, there were dozens of clips circulating across platforms, each with their own spin on the story. Some defended me, most questioned. A few were cruel in the way only anonymous internet commentary could be. Patricia had sent a detailed briefing at 5 in the morning. The press conference was scheduled for 10 at the Riverside Conference Center, a neutral venue large enough to accommodate the media interest that had exploded overnight. 3 local TV stations would carry it live. The Business Journal would stream it online. She estimated we'd have an audience of several thousand, maybe more, if the clips went viral. I dressed carefully in a navy suit, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back in the same simple style I wore for board meetings. Professional, but not showy. Competent, but not intimidating. I looked at myself in the mirror and practiced staying calm, keeping my voice level, maintaining eye contact with cameras that would dissect every micro-expression. The conference center was already packed when I arrived. Reporters filled the first 3 rows, cameras positioned at strategic angles, lights bright enough to make me squint. Behind them sat people I recognized, business owners I'd worked with, staff from my restaurants, former classmates who'd probably never given me a second thought until last night. In the back row, I spotted Marcus and Sophia, both of them having taken the morning off to be here. Patricia met me backstage, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes worried. "You ready?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." "Remember, stick to the statement we prepared. Don't get defensive. Don't apologize for things that aren't wrong. And Grace," she touched my arm, "tell the truth, but tell it like you're talking to one person, not a crowd. Make them see you as human." I walked onto the small stage and took my place behind the podium. The crowd noise died down. Camera flashes went off in rapid succession. I took a breath and began. "Good morning. My name is Grace Parker, though some of you know me as Grace Rowan, the name I use professionally. I'm the founder and CEO of Rowan Harbor Holdings, a private investment company that owns and operates 3 restaurants across 2 states. Last night at my sister's wedding reception, some questions were raised about how I built my business. I'm here this morning to answer those questions fully and transparently." I paused, letting the room settle into complete silence. 15 years ago, I was 18 years old and in my first semester of college. My grandmother, Eleanor Hartfield, began showing signs of severe dementia. She needed full-time care. My parents were in the middle of bankruptcy proceedings, though I didn't know that at the time. They encouraged me to leave school and move in with my grandmother. So I did. I watched faces in the audience, saw some softening with understanding, others remaining skeptical. For 2 years I took care of her. I worked part-time jobs to pay my bills and sent money home to my parents, who told me they needed help with my younger sister's expenses. What I didn't know was that there were no expenses. The money I sent went directly to paying their bankruptcy creditors. My college fund, which they told me was being used for my sister's education, was also redirected to pay their debts. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cameras clicked furiously. "When my grandmother passed away 8 years ago, she left me her house. I sold it for $230,000. That money became the seed capital for what would eventually become Rowan Harbor Holdings." I looked directly at the cameras. "So yes, my business started with inherited money. And I'm not ashamed of that fact." I let that statement hang in the air. What inheritance gave me was opportunity. What I did with that opportunity was work. For 5 years, I studied commercial real estate markets, learned financial modeling, built relationships with contractors and suppliers and lenders. I made investment decisions that sometimes paid off and sometimes didn't. I took calculated risks. I worked 80-hour weeks. I slept in my office more times than I can count. My voice was steady now, finding its rhythm. 3 years ago, I opened Maison Bissé, and I made a choice that some people find confusing. I worked the floor as a server, not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand every aspect of the business I was building. I wanted to know what it felt like to carry heavy trays for 6 hours straight. I wanted to hear what customers said when they didn't think the owner was listening. I wanted my staff to see me as someone who understood their work, because I'd done it myself. I saw Jennifer Marks in the 3rd row, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. Last night, my mother told a reporter that I was just a waitress who got lucky with inheritance money, and she was half right. I was a waitress. I carried serving trays. I poured wine. I cleared plates. I did all the work that people in the hospitality industry do every single day. I paused, making sure every word landed clearly. But being a server didn't demean me. It didn't make me less capable or less intelligent or less worthy of respect. Only contempt demeans people. Only the assumption that manual labor is beneath dignity. Only the belief that someone's worth is determined by their job title rather than their character. The room was absolutely silent now. So yes, I inherited money. Yes, I used that money to start my business. But I also worked for every success that came after. I made smart decisions. I built something real, and I refuse to apologize for either the inheritance or the work, because both are part of my story. I looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as I could. If that makes me a fake president, then I guess I'm a fake president who employs 67 people across 3 states who's paid millions in taxes, who's created opportunities for others to build their own careers. I can live with that. I stepped back from the podium. Thank you for your time. I won't be taking questions today, but my attorney has prepared a full financial disclosure packet for any journalists who want to verify the facts I've shared. Patricia appeared at my side as reporters shouted questions. She guided me toward the exit, her hand firm on my elbow while security kept the crowd at bay. We made it through the door and into the corridor beyond, and I finally let myself breathe. That was perfect, Patricia said. Honest, strong, unapologetic, exactly what we needed. I nodded, unable to speak, yet the adrenaline still coursing through my system. We walked toward the parking garage exit, and I was already thinking about what came next, about getting back to work, about moving forward. That's when I saw her. Ava stood near the exit doors, still in casual clothes, her hair pulled back, no makeup, looking younger and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. When she saw me, she straightened and took a step forward. I did what you said, sister, Ava said, waiting. I looked at my sister, confused. Did what I said about being honest, about telling the truth even when it's hard. She glanced at Patricia, then back at me. Can we talk just for a minute? Patricia checked her watch. I need to get back to the office and start damage control. Grace called me this afternoon. I nodded, and she disappeared through the exit doors, leaving Ava and me standing in the empty corridor. What happened? I asked. Ava took a shaky breath. This morning I went into Morrison and Hale, asked to speak with the managing partners, all 3 of them the same ones who were at my wedding. She twisted her hands together, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. I told them about some mistakes I made on the Riverside acquisition file. Nothing huge, but things I should have caught. Billing discrepancies I noticed but didn't report. Research I claimed to have completed but actually rushed through. Small things that added up to me not being as thorough as I should have been. My heart sank. Ava, why would you... Because you were right, she interrupted. Last night, when you said I was exhausted being who they wanted me to be, I've been so focused on looking perfect, on never making mistakes, that I've been cutting corners and hoping no one would notice, and the stress of hiding it was killing me. She met my eyes. I watched you stand up there this morning and own your whole story, the good and the complicated and the parts that don't fit the narrative. And I thought if she can do that, maybe I can too. What did the partners say? Ethan was there. He spoke up before they could respond. A small smile crossed her face. He said that in his experience, the people who admit their mistakes are the ones worth investing in. That integrity matters more than a perfect record. He asked them to consider leniency based on my honesty and my willingness to fix what I'd done wrong. I stared at my sister, seeing her clearly for maybe the first time in years. Not the perfect daughter, not the golden child, but a young woman trying to figure out how to be real in a world that had taught her performance was more important than authenticity. And, I prompted, they're putting me on a performance improvement plan instead of firing me. 3 months of close supervision, mandatory ethics training, and I have to redo all the work I rushed through. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. My perfect record is ruined. Mom and Dad are going to be horrified, and I feel lighter than I have in years. Ava, I said softly, I'm proud of you. Her eyes filled with tears. Are you? Because I helped them humiliate you? I chose that restaurant knowing what would happen. I wanted the truth to come out, but I didn't think about how much it would hurt you in the process. I was so focused on my own need to escape being perfect that I used your pain as a weapon against them. You were also the only one who saw me clearly, I reminded her. You knew I was more than what they said I was. You believed in me enough to think the truth would come out. I didn't know it would explode like that. The debt notice Mom's breakdown, the reporter, all of it. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Your wedding day should have been about you and Brandon, not about our family's dysfunction. Our family's dysfunction was going to come out eventually, she said. Maybe it needed to happen this way. Maybe we all needed to hit bottom before we could start being honest with each other. We stood there in silence for a moment, and then Ava said quietly, I watched your press conference on my phone while I was waiting. The part about how being a server didn't demean you, how only contempt demeans people. That was the most powerful thing I've ever heard anyone say. She looked down at her hands. I've spent my whole life measuring my worth by my title, by what other people thought of me, by whether I looked successful enough. And you just stood there and said your worth came from your character, not your job. I've never thought about it that way before. It took me a long time to learn it, I admitted. And I'm still learning. Grace? I want to be like you? Her voice broke slightly. Not successful like you, though. That would be nice too. But honest like you. Strong enough to tell the truth even when it costs something. For the first time in my life, I want to become someone like you instead of who they want me to be. Something cracked open in my chest, some wall I'd been maintaining between us for years. I stepped forward and pulled my sister into a hug, and she collapsed against me, her carefully constructed poise finally breaking completely. She sobbed into my shoulder while I held her, my own tears finally coming after a night and morning of holding everything together. You're going to be okay, I whispered. We're both going to be okay. She pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve in a gesture that would have horrified our mother. I ruined my makeup, she said with a watery laugh. You're not wearing any makeup. Exactly. I left the house without makeup. Mom would die. She took a shaky breath. I think I'm done trying to be perfect for them. I think I'm just going to try being real and see what happens. That's terrifying, I said honestly. Yeah, she agreed. But watching you do it makes me think maybe it's possible. We stood there together, two sisters who'd spent most of their lives on opposite sides of our parents' expectations, finally finding common ground in the decision to stop performing and start being authentic. It felt fragile and new and impossibly important. The elevator at the end of the corridor dinged, the doors sliding open with a soft mechanical sound. Howard and Marianne stepped out, both of them looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. My father's suit was rumpled. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying. When they saw us standing together, they stopped. We need to talk, Howard and Marianne said, stepping out. I felt Ava tense beside me. My parents looked exhausted, their usual polish completely stripped away. My father's hair was uncombed, his tie missing. My mother had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Not here, I said, gesturing toward the conference rooms that lined the corridor. Let's find somewhere private. We filed into the nearest empty room, a generic corporate space with a long table and uncomfortable chairs. Ava sat beside me, a silent show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed by our parents. My father remained standing, his hands gripping the back of a chair. My mother sank into a seat across from us, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. I watched your press conference, my father said without preamble, on the TV in our hotel room. And, I asked, keeping my voice neutral, and you made us look like monsters. His voice was tight with controlled anger. You told the entire city that we took your college fund, that we lied about your grandmother, that we manipulated you into supporting us financially. I told the truth, I corrected. I didn't embellish. I didn't exaggerate. I stated facts that are documented and verifiable. You humiliated us. My mother's voice was small, broken. Everyone we know saw that press conference. Our friends, our colleagues, people from the club. They're all going to know what we did. Yes, I agreed. They are. Just like I've lived for 15 years with everyone knowing the version of events you created, where I was the lazy dropout who couldn't handle responsibility. My father's grip on the chair tightened until his knuckles went white. There's something else you need to know. About the debt. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his jacket pocket and threw it on the table between us. The loan that's being called due, the $85,000. I didn't just take it out in my name. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What did you do? I used you as a co-signer. The words came out in a rush like he was ripping off a bandage. 3 years ago, when we refinanced the lake house after you paid off the original mortgage, the bank needed additional collateral. Better credit. So I forged your signature on the loan documents. The room went completely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. You committed fraud, I said quietly, using my identity. I was going to pay it back before you ever found out, he said, defensive now. But then Ava got engaged and the wedding costs kept climbing and we needed to take out the new loan for the reception. I thought we'd have time to pay it down before anyone noticed. But the bank changed their lending standards, I finished. And now the loan is in default and my name is on it. My mother leaned forward, her eyes pleading. Grace, you have to understand. We did it for Ava. What parent doesn't want their youngest to be happy? She deserved a beautiful wedding, a perfect start to her marriage. We would have done the same for you if I'd been the kind of daughter worth investing in, I interrupted. If I'd been perfect like Ava. That's not what I meant, she protested weakly. That's exactly what you meant. I looked at both of them, these people who'd raised me and shaped me and hurt me in ways I was still discovering. You've spent my entire adult life making choices about my money, my reputation, my future, all while telling yourselves it was for someone else's benefit. For Ava's education, that didn't exist. For family stability during your bankruptcy. For Ava's perfect wedding. I paused, letting the words sink in. But it was never really about protecting your children. It was about protecting yourselves, your image, your lifestyle, your inability to live within your means. That's not fair, my father started, but I held up my hand. Parents don't protect children by lying to them and stealing from them. Parents don't protect children by using their identities to commit fraud. Parents protect their children by being honest, by taking responsibility for their own mistakes, by modeling integrity even when it's difficult. I looked at my mother. You protect your children by letting them be imperfect and loving them anyway, by supporting their dreams even when those dreams don't match yours, by celebrating their successes instead of resenting them. My mother was crying again, silent tears tracking down her face. We made mistakes. We know that now. But we're still your parents, Grace. We're still family. Family doesn't use each other, Ava said suddenly, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Family doesn't forge signatures and steal identities and lie for 15 years. I'm done pretending what you did was normal or acceptable just because you're my parents. My father's face flushed red. You have no idea what it's like to be responsible for a family, to have to make impossible choices. I know exactly what it's like to make impossible choices. I cut in. I made them when I was 18 years old and chose to care for Grandma instead of finishing college. I made them when I sent you money I couldn't afford to send because you told me you needed it. I made them when I built a business from scratch while working 80-hour weeks. I stood, needing the physical space. The difference is, my choices didn't involve victimizing other people. My father grabbed the debt papers from the table and threw them toward me, his composure finally cracking completely. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. If you don't help us, we lose everything. The lake house, our credit rating, possibly our primary residence if they decide to investigate the refinancing fraud. We'll be destroyed, Grace. Completely destroyed. I looked at the scattered papers, at my parents' desperate faces, at my sister sitting beside me with her jaw set in determination. And I felt something shift inside me, some final severing of the obligation I'd carried my entire life to fix their problems and shoulder their consequences. That's no longer we, I said quietly. I stepped back from the table, creating physical distance from my parents' desperation. My father's face was red with frustration, my mother still crying into her hands. Ava sat frozen, watching everything unfold with wide eyes. You don't understand, my father said, his voice breaking. We have 60 days. That's all. 60 days to come up with $85,000, or we lose the lake house and potentially face fraud charges for the forged signature. Your signature, Grace. If they investigate, this could destroy you too. I know, I said calmly. I pulled my laptop from my bag, the one I'd brought to the press conference with all my documentation. I've known about the fraud for 3 days. My attorney discovered it when she did a routine credit check after the wedding. My mother's head snapped up. You knew and you didn't say anything. I was deciding what to do about it. I opened the laptop and pulled up a file I'd prepared last night after the press conference, after reading through Patricia's analysis of my parents' financial situation. But before we discuss the current debt, there's something you should know about the old one. I turned the screen toward them. On it was a series of bank transfers from 3 years ago, all originating from an account registered to a holding company called Hartfield Financial Services. The transfers totaled $147,000, made in monthly installments over the course of a year. The recipient was the mortgage company that held the lien on my parents' lake house. My father stared at the screen, confusion replacing anger. What is this? 3 years ago, you were 6 months away from losing the lake house to foreclosure. The second mortgage you'd taken out during your bankruptcy was in default. You'd missed 4 payments. I scrolled through the documentation. I found out by accident when one of my investment partners mentioned seeing your property on a pre-foreclosure list. I was running market analysis for potential acquisitions. My mother's face had gone pale. We never told you about that. I know. You told everyone, including me, that everything was fine, that you'd weathered the bankruptcy and were back on your feet. I clicked to the next screen showing the corporate registration for Hartfield Financial Services. So I set up this company, named it after Grandma's maiden name, and I paid off your debt. All of it. Anonymously. The silence in the room was absolute. You. My father's voice trailed off. That was you. Every payment, for 12 months, until the mortgage was completely satisfied and you were clear. I looked at both of them. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd either refuse out of pride or accept and then resent me for it. And because honestly, I didn't want your gratitude. I just wanted you to stop drowning. My mother was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to process information that didn't fit her understanding of reality. But that's impossible. You were just starting your business then. How could you afford? I made it work, I said simply. I delayed some expansion plans. I took a smaller salary. I refinanced some properties at higher rates to free up capital. It cost me, but not as much as watching you lose everything would have cost. Ava was staring at me with something like awe. You saved them 3 years ago and never told anyone. I saved them because they're my parents, I said. Not because I expected recognition or repayment. I saved them because despite everything, despite all the ways they've hurt me, I didn't want to be the daughter who had the means to help and chose not to. I didn't want to live with that. I closed the laptop. I didn't save you to be thanked. I saved you because I didn't want the label ungrateful daughter, even if I was the only one who knew the truth. My father sank into a chair, his earlier bluster completely deflated. All this time we thought we'd managed to save ourselves, that we'd pulled through on our own. You did pull through, I said. You just had help you didn't know about. Why are you telling us now? My mother asked, her voice barely audible. Because you need to understand something. I picked up the scattered debt papers from the table. I paid off your old debt out of love, out of a sense of family obligation, out of hope that maybe if you had stable ground under your feet, you'd become the parents I needed you to be. I met their eyes. But you didn't. You took out a new loan instead. You forged my signature. You spent $85,000 on a wedding to maintain appearances, and when it all came crashing down, your first instinct was to blame me for not helping you. Grace, we didn't know, my mother started. That's exactly my point, I interrupted. You didn't know. You've never known what I've sacrificed for this family, what I've given up, what I've done to protect you from your own choices. And instead of being grateful for what you had, instead of learning from your mistakes, you just kept making new ones and expecting someone else to clean them up. My phone buzzed on the table. A notification from my email. I glanced at it absently, then froze. The sender was listed as Eleanor Hartfield Memorial Trust, with a subject line that made my breath catch. Final letter. Delayed delivery per instructions. I opened the email with shaking hands. Attached was a scanned document, my grandmother's handwriting unmistakable even in digital form. The header read simply, "To Grace, to be delivered when the time is right." The first line made tears spring to my eyes. If you're reading this, perhaps Mom has finally understood. I read the first line again, my mind struggling to process the words. If you're reading this, perhaps Mom has finally understood. But that didn't make sense. The email said, Eleanor Hartfield Memorial Trust, which implied my grandmother was gone. Yet the message suggested she was writing about my mother in present tense, as if observing events that were happening now. I scrolled down to the body of the letter, and my confusion only deepened. My dearest Gracie, it read in my grandmother's familiar script. I'm writing this on Tuesday, November 12th. I think it's Tuesday. The nurses tell me it is anyway. I wanted to write to you about what I saw on the television this morning. You were so brave, sweetheart. So honest and strong. I was so proud watching you stand up there and tell your truth. Tuesday. That was yesterday, the day of my press conference. My hands started shaking. I looked at the email header again, checking the metadata. The scan had been uploaded yesterday evening. The digital postmark showed it had been sent from Sunrise Care Home in Cedar Falls, 40 minutes from here. Grace? Ava's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I have, I whispered. I kept reading. The director here, Susan, she's very kind. She recorded your press conference for me because she knows I sometimes forget to turn on the TV at the right time. I've watched it 3 times now. Each time I forget, I've already seen it, and each time I cry at the same parts. When you talk about being a server and how it didn't demean you, when you explain about the inheritance I left you, when you say that only contempt demeans people not honest work. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I looked up at my parents, at their confused, anxious faces. She's alive, I said. Grandma Eleanor is alive. My mother's face went white. That's impossible. She died 8 years ago. We went to her funeral. We settled her estate. Did we? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Or did you tell me she died and I believed you, because why would you lie about something like that? I thought back to that terrible week 8 years ago. My father calling to tell me Grandma had passed peacefully in her sleep. The closed casket funeral that I'd been too grief-stricken to question. The estate settlement handled entirely by my parents while I was drowning in loss. I'd never seen a death certificate. I'd never spoken to a doctor or a funeral director. I'd just accepted what they told me because she was my grandmother and they were my parents, and who lies about death? We didn't lie. my mother said, but her voice was uncertain. Howard, we didn't. Did we? My father had gone very still, his face ashen. The nursing home, he said quietly. When Eleanor's dementia got worse, when she started not recognizing anyone, the facility recommended we tell her she was in a hospital, that she was recovering from an illness. They said it would be easier for her than understanding she couldn't go home. He looked at me, and I saw something like horror dawning in his eyes. And we thought it would be easier for everyone if people thought she'd passed. The medical bills were enormous. The nursing home was expensive. We were still in bankruptcy. We thought if we could access her estate, use it to pay for her care, it would solve everything. You faked her death. I said the words, feeling surreal even as I spoke them. You faked her death to get access to her money. We didn't fake anything, my mother protested. We let people believe what they wanted to believe. We had power of attorney. We moved her to a long-term care facility under the trust. We told you and Ava she'd passed because we didn't want you to see her like that, so confused and frightened. We thought we were protecting you from pain. You thought you were protecting yourselves from having to share the inheritance. Ava said, her voice cold. If Grace and I knew she was alive, we'd want to visit her. We'd see the bills. We'd know where the money was going. I returned to the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I know I write to you often, my grandmother continued. Susan tells me I send you a letter almost every week. I don't remember sending them, but she shows me the copies she keeps. Sometimes I write the same things over and over. I apologize for my mistakes. I tell you I'm proud of you. I worry that you'll think I'm being repetitive, but Susan says you never complain. She says you read every letter and send short notes back, even though I probably won't remember receiving them. Every week. She'd been writing to me every week, and I'd never received a single letter. 8 years of correspondence that had gone somewhere else, intercepted by someone who wanted me to believe she was dead. The thing about this disease, the letter continued, is that I forget so much. I forget what day it is, what I had for breakfast, whether I've already told someone a story. But there are some things I never forget, even when everything else is fog. I never forget your name. I never forget that you're my granddaughter. And I never forget that you are my pride, Gracie. Every time my memory resets, every time the fog rolls back in and I lose track of who I am or where I am, that one truth remains. I have a granddaughter named Grace, and she makes me proud. I was crying openly now, not caring that my parents could see. Ava had moved to stand beside me, reading over my shoulder, her own tears falling onto my blazer. Susan told me something interesting today, my grandmother wrote. Mother, she said I've been writing the same letter to you for 8 years. Different words each time, but the same message. I'm proud of you. Don't let them make you cruel. Remember that forgiveness isn't about them, it's about you. She said it's like even when my brain can't hold on to memories, it holds on to what matters most. The love, the pride, the hope that you'll be okay. The letter went on for 2 more pages, my grandmother's handwriting growing shakier toward the end as fatigue set in. She talked about the garden she thought she still tended, about recipes. She wanted to teach me about dreams she had, where I was young again, and we were baking together in her kitchen. Then, at the very end, there was a note in different handwriting. Grace, this is Susan Whitmore, director of Sunrise Care Home. Your grandmother asked me to add this note. She's been a resident here for 8 years, cared for through a trust that was established before her diagnosis progressed. I've been sending copies of her letters to the address we have on file, which appears to be your parents' home. I assumed they were forwarding them to you. If you're receiving this letter directly, it means our new automated system finally found your correct email address through public business records. I think your grandmother would want you to know that she speaks about you often, even when she can't remember speaking about you 5 minutes earlier. You are her constant, her true north, the one thing her failing mind refuses to let go of. If you'd like to visit, we'd welcome you any time. She may not remember the visit afterward, but in the moment, I believe she would know you. Some connections run deeper than memory. I looked up at my parents, these strangers who'd shaped my entire life through carefully constructed lies. My father had his head in his hands. My mother was staring at nothing, her face blank with shock at having been discovered. "You kept her letters," I said. 8 years of letters from a woman you told me was dead, and you kept them from me. "We thought it would be harder for you," my mother whispered, knowing she was alive but not herself. "We thought it was a kindness." "You thought it was convenient," Ava said. "You thought if Grace knew Grandma was alive, she'd want control over the care decisions. She'd see how you were managing the money. She'd ask questions you didn't want to answer." I stood tucking my phone into my pocket, the letter saved to read again later, to absorb fully when I wasn't standing in a conference room with the people who'd stolen 8 years of relationship from me. "I'm going to see her," I said. "Today. Right now." "Grace, wait," my father started. "Let us explain." "There's nothing to explain," I interrupted. "You lied, you stole, you manipulated, and you did it all while telling yourselves you were protecting me." I moved toward the door, Ava falling into step beside me. "But here's what Grandma understood that you never did. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the only way to keep yourself whole." I drove to Sunrise Care home that afternoon with Ava in the passenger seat, both of us silent with the weight of what we'd learned. My grandmother was alive. For 8 years, I'd carried the grief of her loss, and all that time she'd been 40 minutes away writing me letters I never received, living in a fog that occasionally cleared just enough for her to remember my name. The visit was everything I'd hoped for and nothing I'd expected. She knew me for about 20 minutes, called me by name, held my hand, and told me about a pie she wanted to bake. Then the fog rolled back in, and I became a kind stranger she was polite to but didn't recognize. I stayed for 2 hours, and Ava cried the entire drive home. 3 days later, I sent a text to my parents. "Dinner at Maison Bissay, Saturday 7 o'clock, just family. We need to finish this conversation." My father responded immediately. "We'll be there." My mother's text came an hour later. "Thank you for giving us another chance." Saturday evening, I arrived at the restaurant early and found Nora in the office reviewing next week's reservations. She looked up when I entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Your family's table is ready," she said. "Private corner as requested. Should I assign a server, or will you be handling it yourself?" "Elena can serve," I said. "This is a family dinner, not a performance." She nodded, but I saw the concern in her eyes. "And if things get difficult, then they get difficult," I replied. "But I'm not walking away this time until we reach some kind of resolution." The restaurant was busy for a Saturday. Every table occupied the dining room, filled with the pleasant hum of conversation and clinking silverware. I'd changed out of my business clothes into a simple black dress, professional, but softer somehow. Not the uniform I'd worn at Ava's wedding, not the armor I'd worn to the press conference. Just myself. My parents arrived exactly on time, neither early to demonstrate eagerness nor late to show defiance. My mother wore a navy dress I'd seen 100 times. My father had on his usual blazer and tie. They looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the events of the past week in ways that went beyond the physical. Ava and Brandon arrived 5 minutes later, her hand firmly in his. He'd been surprisingly supportive through everything, this man I barely knew, who'd married into our family's dysfunction. He'd stood by Ava as she'd confessed her work mistakes, accompanied her to visit our grandmother, and now sat beside her with quiet solidarity. We ordered food none of us particularly wanted, and made small talk that felt like walking on ice over deep water. The first course arrived, was picked at, was cleared away. Finally, I couldn't stand the pretense anymore. "I visited Grandma 3 times this week," I said, setting down my water glass. "Tuesday, Thursday, and yesterday. She recognized me once for about 15 minutes on Thursday. Told me she was proud of me, that she always knew I'd do something important with my life." I looked at my parents. "She also asked about you. Asked when you were coming to visit." My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "Grace, we can explain." "I don't want explanations," I interrupted. "I want accountability. I want change. I want to know that this family can be something other than a cycle of lies and manipulation and people protecting themselves at each other's expense." I pulled out the revised amends plan I'd worked on with Patricia all week, the document that had evolved from punishment to pathway. I slid copies across the table to my parents. "These are the terms," I said. "Not for forgiveness, because forgiveness isn't something you can negotiate. These are the terms for moving forward as a family." My father picked up the document, his hands steady despite the tension in his jaw. My mother kept her hands in her lap, not touching the paper. "First," I continued, "you sign a public statement acknowledging the truth about my college departure, the fake scholarship, and the financial exploitation. It gets sent to the family members who've spent 15 years believing I was a failure. Just the facts, no excessive detail, no dramatic confessions. Just correction of the record." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. "Second, you establish the Eleanor Hartfield Scholarship Fund with an initial contribution of $50,000. It will provide annual scholarships to women from working-class families pursuing careers in hospitality or small business. The fund will be administered by an independent nonprofit, not by anyone in this family." "50,000, my father said quietly. "We don't have that kind of money." "Which brings me to the third term," I said. "You sell the lake house. The market is strong right now. Your property is worth somewhere between $350,000 and $400,000. After paying off the current debt and the fraud penalties I'm negotiating with the bank, you should clear enough to fund the scholarship and have capital left over for a fresh start." "The lake house is our legacy," my mother whispered. "It's where we've spent every summer for 20 years. It's also leveraged beyond its value and tied to a loan with my forged signature," I said not unkindly. "Letting it go isn't punishment. It's consequence. It's taking responsibility for choices you made." Ava spoke up for the first time. "What about the fraud charges Grace's name is on those documents?" "I'm working with the bank," I said. "They're willing to treat it as a clerical error if the debt is paid in full within 90 days, and if Dad signs an affidavit taking full responsibility. No criminal charges. Clean resolution." I looked at my father. "But that only works if you cooperate." He was reading through the document, now his expression unreadable. When he reached the final page, he set it down and looked at me directly. "And the fourth term?" he asked. "The one about ongoing family relationship." "That one's simple," I said. "Basic respect. No more public commentary about my life choices or career. No more comparisons between Ava and me. No more financial entanglement without explicit written agreements. And mandatory family therapy, all of us for at least 6 months." "Therapy," my mother repeated as if I'd suggested something scandalous. "With a licensed professional who specializes in family systems and financial abuse," I confirmed. "Because we need help learning how to be honest with each other, how to have boundaries, how to be family without destroying each other in the process." The table fell silent. Elena appeared to clear our barely touched salads, and I waved her away gently. This conversation needed space. Finally, my father spoke. "You've thought of everything." "I've had a lot of time to think," I replied. 8 years of thinking I'd lost my grandmother. 15 years of thinking I was the family disappointment. 3 years of secretly saving you from bankruptcy while you took out new loans in my name. Yes, I've thought about this extensively." He picked up his pen, the one he always carried in his jacket pocket, monogrammed with his initials. For a long moment, he just held it, staring at the signature line on the amends plan. Then he bowed his head and said quietly but clearly, "We were wrong." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. My mother made a small sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. She was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't speak. My father signed the document with a shaking hand, then slid it to my mother. She stared at it for a long moment before picking up the pen. Her signature was barely legible, wavering and uncertain, but it was there. Ava reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Brandon cleared his throat awkwardly, and I sat there feeling something shift inside me, some long-held tension finally beginning to release. We weren't fixed. We weren't healed. But we were, for the first time in my memory, being honest with each other. The rest of dinner passed in quiet conversation. We talked about logistics, when to list the lake house, which therapist to contact, how to coordinate visits to see Grandma. We talked about Ava's performance improvement plan at work and Brandon's new project. We talked about Maison Bisset's upcoming seasonal menu change. We talked like people who were trying, however imperfectly, to be a family. As we were finishing dessert, Nora appeared at the edge of the dining room, catching my eye. She approached discreetly and leaned down to speak quietly. "Madam President," she asked, "should I prepare the car?" I looked at Nora, confused for a moment, then realized what she was asking. The car service I sometimes used for late business dinners for nights when I was too exhausted to drive myself home after closing. But tonight wasn't about work or exhaustion or needing to be taken care of. "No, thank you," I said quietly. "I'll drive myself tonight." She nodded and stepped away, but something about the exchange had caught the attention of nearby tables. I saw heads turn slightly, conversations pause mid-sentence. The couple at table 12, regular customers who came every Saturday, were watching with open curiosity. The business dinner at table 9 had gone quiet, their attention shifting from their contracts to our family gathering. And then, like ripples spreading across still water, the awareness moved through the entire dining room. Someone recognized me from the press conference. Someone else remembered the viral videos from the wedding. Conversations died away table by table until the whole restaurant had gone quiet, every diner aware that something significant was happening, but not quite sure what. The room froze. But this time the silence felt different than it had at Ava's wedding. Then it had been shock and scandal, the electricity of drama unfolding in real time. This silence was softer, weighted with something I slowly recognized as respect. These were people who'd seen me at my lowest public moment and then watched me stand up at a press conference and own my entire story without apology or shame. They'd seen the messy, complicated truth of family dysfunction, and now they were watching the aftermath with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for witnessing something rare and real. I became aware that I was still sitting while the entire restaurant watched, waiting to see what would happen next. My parents sat frozen across from me, their signed amends plan still on the table between us. Ava had Brandon's hand gripped tight in hers. Even the kitchen sounds had diminished, as if Marcel and his staff had sensed the shift in energy and paused their work. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor in the quiet. The simple act of rising felt somehow ceremonial, like the final movement of a long dance finally reaching its conclusion. "I need you all to understand something," I said, my voice pitched low but carrying in the hushed space. I wasn't sure if I was talking to my family or to the room at large, but the words needed to be said. For 15 years, I've been trying to earn validation from people who couldn't give it because they were too busy protecting their own image. I've been carrying other people's shame, other people's mistakes, other people's unfulfilled dreams. I looked at my parents, and I've been holding on to titles and achievements and proof of my worth because I thought that's what would finally make me enough. My mother was crying again, but quietly now, her hands folded in her lap. My father sat very still, his eyes on the table. But standing here tonight in this restaurant I built with a family that's finally being honest with each other, I realized something. I took a breath, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. The title doesn't matter. President, CEO, owner, server, none of it defines who I am. What defines me is how I treat people. Whether I show up with integrity, whether I can forgive without forgetting, set boundaries without cruelty, succeed without needing to make others feel small. I looked around the room at all these strangers who'd inadvertently become witnesses to my family's transformation. "So keep the title if you want," I said, speaking to everyone and no one. Keep calling me Madam President or Ms. Rowan or whatever label makes you comfortable. I'll keep the peace. I'll keep the self-respect. I'll keep the knowledge that I built something real, that I survived something hard, and that I'm choosing forgiveness not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to be free. Ava stood then, her movements sudden and fierce. She crossed around the table and pulled me into a hug that was tight enough to hurt, desperate enough to communicate everything words couldn't. "I love you," she whispered into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry it took me so long to see you clearly." "I love you too," I whispered back. "And I see you now. Not the perfect daughter, just you. That's enough." When she pulled away, I saw that other diners had started to stand as well. Not in applause, thank God, because I couldn't have handled that. But in a kind of respectful acknowledgement, the way people stand when someone important enters a room, or when a moment of genuine human connection deserves to be witnessed and honored. My father stood too, his movements stiff and uncertain. "Grace," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "I don't know how to be different than I've been. I don't know if I can change at 65 if I can learn to be the father you needed instead of the father I was." "That's why we're doing therapy," I said gently. "None of us know how to do this, but we're going to try." My mother rose last, leaning heavily on the table. She looked at me across the small distance between us, and for the first time in my memory, I saw her without the armor of perfect makeup and practiced smiles. Just a woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years living a life she thought she was supposed to want, only to watch her daughter achieve the dreams she'd abandoned. "I'm proud of you," she said, and the words were so unexpected, so raw with emotion, that I felt my throat close. "I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know how to say it without admitting that I was jealous. That watching you succeed felt like watching everything I could have been if I'd been braver." "You can still be brave," I said. "It's not too late, Mom. You could take some of the money from the lake house sale and do something for yourself. Take a cooking class, start a blog, do something that's yours, not Dad's, not the country club's, just yours." She nodded, tears streaming freely now. "Maybe I will." The restaurant was beginning to return to normal conversations, resuming in low murmurs, the kitchen sounds picking up again. The moment of suspended reality was passing, life resuming its usual rhythms. But something fundamental had shifted both in this room and in our family. I walked my parents to the door, Ava and Brandon following. We stood in the entrance where just a week ago I'd watched guests arrive for a wedding that was supposed to be a celebration, but had become a reckoning instead. "Thursday at 3, I reminded them. "First therapy session. Don't be late." "We'll be there," my father promised. They left in their car, my mother's head resting against the window, my father's shoulders slightly hunched. They looked tired and old and human in ways I'd never let myself see before. Ava hugged me one more time before leaving with Brandon. "Sunday," she asked. "Could we visit Grandma together?" "Every Sunday," I agreed. "For as long as she's with us." After they'd gone, I stood in the doorway of Maison Bissay, my restaurant, my achievement, my refuge, and my burden and my joy all rolled into one. The evening air was cool against my skin. Streetlights were beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over the city. Inside, my staff was serving the last of the dinner rush, Marcus moving through the room with practiced efficiency, Sophia consulting with a customer about wine pairings, Elena balancing 3 plates on her arm with the grace of long experience. This was what I'd built. Not just a business, but a place where people like me could work with dignity, where service was honored instead of dismissed, where someone's worth wasn't measured by their title, but by their character. Nora appeared beside me, her tablet tucked under her arm. "Long week," she observed. "Longest of my life." I agreed. "You okay?" I thought about that question. Was I okay? My family was broken and trying to heal. My grandmother was alive but disappearing into fog. My past was public knowledge and my privacy was gone. The comfortable anonymity I'd maintained for years had been shattered irreparably. But I was free. free from secrets, free from the weight of other people's opinions, free to define myself on my own terms. "Yeah," I said, and felt the truth of it resonate through my chest. "I think I actually am." She smiled and headed back inside, leaving me standing in the doorway between the restaurant's warm light and the cool darkness beyond. I could hear laughter from one of the tables, the clink of glasses, the low hum of human connection happening over good food and good wine. I stepped forward into the light, feeling it wash over me, and smiled at the profound simplicity of the moment. No more performance, no more pretending. Just Grace Parker, 33 years old, flawed and strong, and finally free from the past. Marcus appeared with a question about tomorrow's reservations, and I turned to answer him, but he stopped mid-sentence. "Sorry, should I have said, Madam President, I know you prefer—" "Don't call me President," I said, and my smile widened into something genuine and unguarded. Just Grace. And that's Grace's story. A story about a woman who was told she wasn't enough her entire life, who worked in silence, while others took credit, who forgave before she was asked, and stood firm when she needed to. She didn't win by destroying her family. She won by refusing to let their limitations define her worth. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who didn't respect you? How did you handle it? What would you have done in Grace's position? And here's the question that's probably on everyone's mind. Do you think Grace should have helped her parents with the debt? Or was she right to let them face the consequences of their own choices? Was she too harsh or not harsh enough? The comment section is going to be interesting on this one. If you made it all the way to the end of this 3-hour story, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Grace's journey from humiliation to liberation. Stories like this take weeks to research and write, and your time and attention mean everything. If you want more stories about family drama redemption and people finding their strength in impossible situations, hit that subscribe button. We post new stories every week, and trust me, we have some incredible ones coming up. Next week's story involves a mother-in-law, a secret inheritance, and a wedding dress that changes everything. You won't want to miss it. And if this story made you think, made you feel something, or reminded you of your own journey, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling with toxic family dynamics. Someone who's trying to figure out how to forgive without forgetting. Someone who needs to know that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Leave a like if Grace's story resonated with you. Leave a comment with your thoughts. And remember, just like Grace learned, your worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. Not your parents, not your siblings, not anyone's. You define yourself. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Set those boundaries. Stand in your truth. And never ever let anyone make you feel small for being exactly who you are. This is your reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to shrink.